Okay, good morning. Let's see, so I'll just kind of mention what I mentioned yesterday. It's really good to be back doing in-person stuff again. And just kind of last night just makes me think about it even more, going out, having dinner with folks and talking with folks afterwards and at breakfast this morning. So I don't know, those are almost the most valuable conversations for me. So, not that the whole group stuff isn't good. So, but it's really good stuff, and I'm really glad we're back in that mode again. That's pretty special. So I'll ask if you are talking this morning, kind of like we did yesterday, as much as you can, use the microphones so that everybody can hear you. This morning we have an independent news media outfit that asked to film some of the reports this morning. So I guess I took it upon myself to tell them that was okay. But anytime throughout the morning, any of you, as we move on all morning, anytime any of you are uncomfortable with that, just let me know and we'll tell them they're done. So just wanted to let you know what was going on with the camera being here. So this morning we're going to hear the conflict reports from those that are out there actually working on grizzly bear conflicts. We're going to hear a little bit from the science team. We're going to hear a short update on some I&E efforts. And then we're going to have a discussion about things related to the conservation strategy, how we need to maybe incorporate some things and the timing of that. And then David's going to help us with maybe talking a little bit more about thinking about our work plan and what we're going to be working on. So that's kind of what this morning is. So it's good stuff. A lot of it for us here at the table, at least at the beginning, is we get to sit back and just listen to others talk about what they're doing. So I have, is this on? Is it? There, I'm using the mic. So I have another recognition to do this morning. And so this one goes along with one of the bear paws that we don't have yet, but it'll come with that. So this recognition is for Kevin Fry. And Danielle's also going to help me with this. So I'll just read this. For his exceptional contributions to grizzly bear management and research in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, we thank him for his more than 30 years of steady, unassuming toil and dedication to the goal of ensuring that grizzly bears forever remain a part of this special place. So that's the formal part of this, and Danielle's going to kind of elaborate on it.
Thanks, Jim. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Euler. I work for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and I'm the Information Education Outreach Chair for this subcommittee. But today, my words are not just my own. They come from a bunch of Kevin's colleagues and friends in our ecosystem and beyond. So I'm lucky to have worked with Kevin and call him a friend. This morning I want to take a few minutes to recognize the impact that Kevin has had on the ecosystem and its people and bears. Kevin Fry retired last summer after spending more than 30 years as Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Grizzly Management Specialist for the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. In that position, he has been one of the primary forces in grizzly recovery. He became the quintessential professional among that elite group of field-going bear managers. He garnered unmatched wisdom, knowledge, and skill in a job that required a lot of all three. To this, he had added his own persona of patience, perseverance, integrity, dedication, and remarkable social skills. Kevin has a keen moral compass to guide him. He was also very good at a uniquely difficult and dangerous job. That is, anything Kevin was involved in was done well. You could count on that. Kevin spent many years working with wildlife even before he was involved with grizzly bears. Much of his early career was spent working with the Wildlife Lab at FWP Region 3 headquarters in Bozeman while he finished his degree at MSU. Kevin was heavily involved in the contentious bison issues of the 80s and early 90s. Most of that time was spent in the field handling bison conflicts in the Gardner and Hebgen basins. Kevin worked side by side with enforcement staff from multiple agencies, biologists, and tribal personnel. He cut his teeth trapping grizzlies for the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team under the tutelage of Dick and Bonnie Knight. Dick was the original team leader for the IGBC, and his field crews were responsible for many of the early capture, collaring, and tracking of grizzlies in the ecosystem. The grizzly population continued to increase in number and expand in distribution. During this time, Kevin saw a need that the state of Montana would require a grizzly bear management specialist to handle the ever-increasing conflicts between humans and bears. Through due diligence and persistence, he carved out what would become a job that he retired from more than 30 years later. Kevin also created the first permanent grizzly bear management technician position in Montana. In the early years of Kevin's career, he was primarily focused on reducing bear mortalities resulting from unsecured attractants. This may sound like a simple task, but the reality of getting there was incredibly complex task of working with landowners, livestock producers, recreationists, politicians, county and municipal administrative staffs, and land management agencies, as I'm sure all of you here understand very well. Kevin has been a leader in resolving grizzly-human conflicts in the Montana portion of the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, and as such, he's been able to significantly impact public attitudes towards grizzly bears. Kevin is a humble man, and because of his character, he was able to work with a variety of people. He gained public respect and made huge strides in gaining compliance with proper food storage. Some of the people he worked with were not the most congenial and were hard to get along with. On these occasions, Kevin stuck with it and good things happened. For many years, he provided strong mentorship to the technicians, wardens, biologists, and supervisors working around bears in our agency and beyond. His mentoring has groomed the next generation, and even in his retirement from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, he has remained a mentor and guide to his peers, always available to provide valuable expertise. Kevin was always readily available, taking extra time away from his personal life to assist others in need. Working in human-bear conflict is a demanding field, often requiring working long days and through the weekend, as again, many here know. Kevin worked tirelessly problem-solving conflicts. Kevin also had the lead in coordinating with many levels of local, state, and federal government, and that played a role in the grizzly bear's recovery. From county governments to land management agencies, his balanced approach to grizzly recovery was respected. He pioneered many approaches to grizzly management that are still used today. His ability to separate himself from conflict situations to work out what was best for people and bears of Montana required persistent focus, whether bears were active or in their dens. Kevin would always say, "To be an effective grizzly bear manager, never stop thinking about what can happen next." Another of Kevin's strengths is his low-key, unflappable nature. His quiet, patient demeanor puts people at ease. He quickly comes across as a person that can be trusted and respected. He is kind, thoughtful, and compassionate with other living creatures, be they man or beast. He always thought before he spoke up. No matter how stressful the situation, Kevin never lost his cool. That unique ability set an example for those working around him. One colleague recalls working with Kevin and said, "Watching him work that summer, it wasn't really the field skills that I remember, although Kevin had many. It was his calm demeanor when talking with an upset woman who had lost several pet rabbits to a grizzly bear, or the matter-of-fact way that he dealt with bear conflicts that could rattle so many people." To the people who worked with Kevin, his deep commitment to grizzly bears and their recovery was always clear. His great sense of humor and centering influence brought the most contentious discussions regarding hot-button topics of the day, and in a few sentences, distilled them down to something that seemed so obvious in retrospect. Those skills are extremely undervalued when working with controversial issues like grizzly bears and grizzly bear conservation and management, and will be greatly missed by all of us. Kevin's vast knowledge of grizzly bear behavior was acquired from hands-on experience and was unsurpassed. As a result, his colleagues placed utmost confidence in his counsel and recommendations. Grizzlies are unpredictable, but it was amazing how well Kevin could predict how a particular situation was going to play out. One had to wonder if Kevin knew what was in the bear's mind before the bear did. Kevin is a cherished friend to so many people he worked with. His advice was always sound, savvy, and much appreciated. One fellow bear manager said, "His encouragement gave me that little boost of energy that allowed me to forge ahead with the solace that winter snows would soon be putting grizzlies to bed. Kevin talked me through some tough periods of grizzly bear management hell, and his political wisdom and uncompromising support was always appreciated." Another longtime friend of Kevin wrote, Kevin provided sound advice on multiple resource issues that stood the test of time. On more than one occasion, he saved me from myself. He taught me so much, and he was so good at what he did that half the time I didn't know I was being taught. These are the reasons why Kevin was so successful at his work, and his success kept bears alive and safeguarded people and property. It also earned him a unique affection and admiration among his peers. He is a hero of one of the greatest wildlife restoration stories in modern times. It should be acknowledged that this describes his performance and contributions over decades, and that is a legacy worth celebrating.
Thanks, Danielle. Well deserved. I think we'll just dive right in here with the reports, the conflict reports. First up is Montana. And when you folks get up there, introduce yourself, tell us who you are. To start with, please.
Hello, I am Kylie Kemble, a bear specialist for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I did have the honor of working with Kevin Fry for the last several years, and I want to thank Danielle for her very kind words. In 2021, we had Montana, portion of GYE, had 128 conflicts with grizzly bears. 58 of those were livestock depredations between cattle, sheep, and poultry. 55 of those were livestock. These conflicts make up about 45% of the total conflicts for Montana's GYE. We did also have 10 documented grizzly bear mortalities this last year. The average number of grizzly bear conflicts is 88.4 conflicts per year, and 9.4 grizzly bear mortalities per year. As you can see, our conflicts are generally increasing, and for the time being, our mortalities have remained relatively low. During 2021, the largest percentage of our conflicts occurred on public lands at 56% of conflicts. Compared to last year, we had 63% of conflicts occurring on private land. Cattle depredations do make up a large portion of our conflicts. Oops, I skipped something. I apologize. The trend in close encounters, our average number of these conflicts is 11.7 close encounters, 2.4 human injuries, and 2.8 defensive life grizzly bear mortalities. In 2021, there were 15 close encounters, resulting in 2 human injuries, 1 human fatality, and 3 grizzly bear mortalities. Moving on to our livestock depredations. Our yearly average is approximately 18.3 depredations in Region 3, which is our western portion of Montana's GYE, and 16.2 on average in Region 5. In 2021, we had 48 cattle depredations in Region 3 and 7 in Region 5. Here's the distribution of our conflicts across the Montana portion of the GYE. It's interesting to note that 50% of our depredations in 2021 occurred within the demographic monitoring area, and 61% of our total conflicts in 2021 occurred within the demographic monitoring area. Thank you. Yes?
Could you go back to, I might have actually misunderstood when you said this, when you were looking at percentages on...
We're going to give you the mic so everybody can hear
great.
your question.
I really just wanted to look at, when you were talking about percentages on private versus public, I thought you had said the majority were on public, but it was actually the majority were on private?
Sorry, the majority in 2021 were on public lands, whereas in 2020, the majority was on private lands.
And what is this, what is this slide? What year is that slide?
This is 2021. Private conflicts took 44%,
Okay.
or 44% on private lands, and the rest are public lands broken down by the forest,
Okay.
federal, local, and state.
Okay. I was trying to think about how that information, and does that information come back? I know I should know the answer to this, but does that information come back then to land managers so that we have access through this report to look at the specifics of that?
We do provide this specific breakdown within the IGBC report annually. So
Okay.
this information is there. If you want more detailed information, you can certainly, depending on the area. My particular area, I cover Custer-Gallatin National Forest, and Jeremiah Smith right now is covering the Beaverhead Deer Lodge.
Okay. And I might have been actually confused because when it says, under federal, it says 0, but then it shows a breakout of federal ownership.
Yes, it does. I apologize for
okay.
that.
Okay, I think that was actually why I was confused, because I was looking at the number at the top, and then I looked at the 0 for federal, and I didn't look below it, and I was thinking, well, that doesn't make sense, so, okay.
Yeah, so the numbers broken down by forest are accurate.
Okay, got it, thanks.
Is this just Region 3?
This is all of Montana portion of GYE.
So how many, what's the total number of livestock in Montana?
Yeah.
I
I
do
don't
not
think-
know how many
I don't-
livestock.
Can you gauge proportionally how much depredation there is proportional to the total number of livestock in the state?
That is a very good question. I do not know the total number of livestock in Montana's portion of GYE.
Certainly get it.
Thank you, Kylie. You can just give the mic to Jeremy there. So next we've got Idaho.
Hello, my name is Jeremy Nicholson. Before I get going, I'd like to give a shout out to Kevin Fry as well. We are on the border with each other, and I talk to him all the time, and I still talk to him and ask for his advice, so I appreciate him and Jeremiah. So today I'll be talking about grizzly bear conflicts in the Idaho portion of the GYE. And I always show this map because some people are not familiar with the area. For the most part, grizzly bear conflicts occur in Island Park. When you get down to the Teton Valley area, most of the time those are black bear situations we're dealing with. Not to say you can't have both in both areas, but that's generally the way we see it. From 1992 to 2001, you can see the conflicts, ebbs and flows over time. It wasn't until about 2005 when we started seeing conflicts every year. I don't know why when I came along in 2016 the conflicts went up. That hurts my feelings a little bit, but I do think it's because there's a lot of people out there, more people than ever, every year, and the COVID surge was a real thing. Everybody's coming up there. And I'm sure, talking to Mike Boyce this morning, more and more people on the forest, so as much as we try, it's hard to keep them down a little bit. But in 2021, we had the most conflicts on record so far, but I think a lot of that is because we really put in a lot of effort trying to get people to report conflicts as they occur and in the beginning of the stages of conflict before they pop up, so before they get any more serious. And one thing that we saw last year is a new phenomenon is everybody and their brother has these cameras up there. So we're seeing more and more people are aware of bears in their neighborhood. I'm really available to a lot of the people in the community. So every morning I get a new picture sent to me of grizzly bears in their yard. So a little stressful, but it's good to know the make and model of the bears moving through. So just a lot more people on the ground seeing the bears and a lot more reports coming in. So a pretty typical year for us. We only had one human injury. For last year we had 2, and before that it was 5 or 6 years before that. So we're seeing an increased number of human injuries and conflicts or encounters the last few years. We had 5 encounter situations last year. 2 of those people deployed bear spray and was able to get away unharmed. We had another bear situation where it chased a dog up on a porch, but for the most part pretty low key on that. Our biggest concern and our most conflicts every year is, generally speaking, is bears showing sign of habituation and just spending time near development. We had 14 incidents of bears obtaining anthropogenic foods, 3 incidents of bears causing property damage with no food reward. Despite all the cows and bears that spend close time together, we just don't have that many livestock depredations. So only 5 in our area, which I'm very thankful for. We had 1 bear poached and 1 bear killed in defense of life during the archery season. Despite our population expanding, we have more and more females that are spending their year around in Island Park area producing cubs. At one point last year we had 3 different female groups or family groups that we were kind of dealing with. So a lot more bears in the area, more expanded, but they've not expanded too much down into the demographic monitoring area. Since 1992, we've had way over 95% of our conflicts have occurred inside the DMA, and that was pretty similar to what we saw this year. 48 conflicts, only 1 outside the demographic monitoring area. So that covered our conflicts. I'll talk a little bit about our conflict prevention program. And most of the time people put acknowledgments at the end of the presentation, but I'll put them in the front because these next few slides, definitely we get a lot of funding help from different agencies and just boots on the ground. So appreciate all the people that help us out. So with the funding from different agencies and with ourselves, we were able to hire and train 3 technicians this year. Really good to have 3 people. A lot of times when working on bears and stuff, it would be 2 people going out together, so it helped out a lot. We conduct site visits to identify potential conflict situations like this one here. We talked to over 500 people in neighborhoods. A lot of our population is transient population, so when we knock on doors, we don't always get people there, and that's one thing that we're always battling. But in those situations, we hang door hangers on there and spread the word as the best we can. And then when we do reach people, we try to tell them to reach out to their HOA and send the communication throughout the neighborhood. One thing that we have really focused on, a few years ago, most of the time we have more conflicts on private land than public land, but a few years ago we had more on public land than private land. And one of the reasons we had that was because there were so many incidents in dispersed campsites. And there's a lot of designated campsites in the Caribou-Targhee National Forest, but as people overflow, there's just people everywhere in the forest, and there's no campground host or anybody to go there to monitor those situations, so that's what we're there for. We visited over 900 people in these dispersed campsites, and we've really been focusing on that the last few years, and because of that, we've had less conflicts. And like I said, one team, one dream for Idaho. We have a lot of help up there with the Forest Service, have a really good relationship with Liz Davey, the district ranger, and then Sabrina DeRusso, the wildlife biologist there. And this lady right here, she's a superstar. She's one of our volunteers. She works for us, and I hope I'm as cool as her when I retire. She does a lot of work with us, does a really good stuff, and I'll talk about her in a second. But Sabrina trained 14 volunteers. they have we're in control of the dispersed areas, they're in control of the designated campgrounds. So they spent over 240 hours performing campground walkthroughs, and during that time, they documented over 125 unsecured coolers and other attractants. So a lot of good effort by them, and it's really cool knowing that you have that many volunteers and that many people in the community interested in what we're doing and keeping the bears safe and keeping people safe. So 2020 was a bummer, obviously, with the COVID pandemic. We couldn't get out there and talk to people. So 2021, we're excited to get out and spread our word as much as we could. And in 2021, we had 17 outreach events. We talked to over 2,800 people with our bear trailer, and then just small groups and everything in between. Anybody want to talk about bears, we'd come talk to them. One of our highlights of the year, which was also spearheaded by Becky Lewis, the volunteer I mentioned a second ago. For the second time, she applied and received funding for bear sprays, and so she received over 550 cans of bear spray. And through 2 events, one in Ashton and one in Island Park, we had a bear spray giveaway, and all you had to do was show your proof of some type of sporting license, and we gave you a bear spray. So 700 people attended those events, and over 540 cans were given out. So that's a lot of bear sprays in our area, so pretty cool. In 2020, we learned a lot about using social media. We have a really good communication manager, James Brower here, and he's always putting out good content on Facebook. But we knew that we couldn't get out in the community, so we started hitting our local Facebook page and then also our Idaho Fish and Game Facebook page. So we produced 2 videos, living in bear country and recreating in bear country. We put those out about this time of year. And then another thing that we're really active on is the local Island Park classified page. Those people like to gossip and tell everything, but it's a really good way to talk to people, and we can't always get in contact with people by knocking on the doors because, like I said, it's a transient population. So this is a really good way. People may be in Utah, but they're checking their Facebook page, so a really good way to reach those people. So the next few slides will just be ways that we try to work on removing and securing attractants. Obviously, if you drive through Island Park during the springtime, you're going to see elk, deer, moose, and all that along the road. Unfortunately, a lot of those animals get hit, and those are big food rewards laying on the ground. So last year, we removed over 30 carcasses off the road and in communities. So those are big food rewards, and like the picture on the right, they get a lot of activity anytime a carcass hits the ground up there. For the second year in a row, we had our apple picking in Ashton. For years, there's not any big orchard down there, but there's every little street corner, people will have 2 or 3 apples. And they can't only grow taters down there, they grow a lot of apples too. I mean, they produce them on the trees, on the ground, and for years we had bears that came in the community, females with cubs, everything. So most of those were black bears, but occasionally we'd have a grizzly bear coming into town, but with the efforts of conservation officer volunteers, we were able to remove over 5 truckloads of apples, over a ton of apples, and most of those went to the Grizzly Bear Discovery Center. And like I said, it's really cool when other people are supporting us and helping us out. We try our best to get the word out to secure your attractants. That's the name of the game. With the help of the Grizzly Bear Discovery Center last year, obviously everybody knows they test products there. They had some that were laying around that were still in good shape, so Randy Gravatt from the Discovery Center, he reached out to us and said, we have these, we can't just give them to you. But there were 6 containers that were really in good shape, and the Henry Forks Wildlife Alliance purchased those containers, and we put 4 of them out, 2 of them at businesses and 2 at residents. So awesome to get help along the way. And then finally, we continue to have issues at rental properties, and so we created these signs to help guide the guests that stayed there. We didn't know how well they'd be received, so we advertised it on Facebook and then some of our local events, and by the end of the year we gave out over 200 of these, so it makes me happy thinking about all these signs throughout Island Park in these rental properties, because like I said, they continue to be an issue. Success stories, some of these numbers don't sound too big, but like my supervisor says, you eat an elephant one bite at a time, and that's what we're working on over time. We had 7 businesses that replaced regular trash containers with bear-resistant containers. At least 8 residents removed their bird feeders. That doesn't sound like a lot, but people are really hold on to those bird feeders. So we had one person that we've battled with for 3 years. They had about 10 of them in their yard. Finally, we got them to take it down. At least 8 homes replaced their regular trash containers with bear-resistant containers, and then many more attractants were moved just during the process. So I will leave you with a video that James will play. This is something we just put on social media, just a fun video. People get tired of hearing me talk, but they don't get tired of watching bears. So. This was all from one season. A lot of bears scratching going on. Really cool chest blaze on that bear. That's just a good, fun video to get people's attention and teach them some things along the way. But that's it from Idaho. Any questions?
Jeremy, I know you talked about your volunteers some. Can you just talk just a little bit about like what other help you have? Like, do you have a technician? Do you have...
Yeah, through the funding of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, through the Forest Service, and then some other NGOs, we hired 3 technicians that helped us out. 3 was the most we've had. We built it up from 1 technician to 3. And then, yeah, just within the community, we've got pretty good relationships with everybody now. So the county sheriff's department, anybody when we call on, the Forest Service is really good to work with. Local law enforcement and the Forest Service law enforcement has been really good.
Jeremy, I was wondering who funded the bear spray giveaway?
In the past, it was the Western Wildlife Black Bear Foundation. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I should know that, but that was one of Becky Lewis's things she did. So, but, yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. Wyoming.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, appreciate that, Jeremy, making a real cool video, and then I got to come up here and talk. So it's going to look terrible. So my name is Brian DeBolt, and I'm the large carnivore conflict coordinator for the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. I do need to give a shout out to Kevin also. Kevin Fry's been, part of our group for a really long time, and he's done some great, wonderful things for grizzly bears and people who live with grizzly bears. So thanks, Kevin. We appreciate it. So, this spring is timely to talk about conflicts because bears are going to be coming out of the den, and, as emergence occurs, we start having conflicts. So that's only one portion of what the Wyoming Game and Fish, specifically the large carnivore section, does. We handle black bears, mountain lions, grizzly bears, wolves, and conflicts associated with that. But specific to grizzly bears, we're part of the IGBC, the study team, and of course, and we use data and science to manage these bears. Specifically, with the IGBC mission to manage a recovered population of grizzly bears. And that includes proactively mitigating and mitigating the conflicts that occur. So, and then information and education program. yeah, of course, is huge with all of our jurisdictions. Dan's really going to touch on that here in a few minutes. But large carnivore management, specifically grizzly bears, is extremely difficult for agencies. You know, we have the extremes on either side. You know, folks that are real strong bear advocates and folks that aren't such strong bear advocates, and the agencies are often caught in the middle of that. So I guess if we're making people mad on either side, we're about right. I mean, we must be doing our job. So, and what does drive these annual conflict numbers? Again, nothing new to you folks, but definitely the distribution and abundance of the natural foods on the landscape have an impact. You know, and we're in several years of drought for sure. And but there's no one silver bullet, no one thing that drives annual conflict numbers. There's a lot of variables at play that result in variation throughout the season and from year to year. And one of those, of course, is the social and political atmosphere surrounding areas where bears and people coexist. I mean, there's definitely bears that live in areas and they're managed differently, honestly. You know, if the political climate is such that you know, people are in favor of having grizzly bears on the landscape, that bear's probably going to be treated differently than maybe in another part of the country or different part of the jurisdiction where there's less tolerance for grizzly bears on the landscape. So, again, what are the big reasons? It's pretty simple why we have increasing conflict trends over time. All the jurisdictions so far have shown, and we have the same thing. The number of conflicts are increasing because we got more bears and more people. It's really that simple. So, but to put that into perspective a little bit, just for example, I mean, in Wyoming, you know, the amount of occupied habitat that we have outside of suitable habitat is as big as the state of New Jersey. Okay? That's pretty significant. So, and where are those bears expanding? What does that area consist of? It's mostly private land. Okay? Areas that are dominated by human use. And again, to put that into perspective, how much of that land, again, outside suitable habitat, is on private lands? Well, it's bigger than Yellowstone, Grand Teton, and JDR combined. Okay? That's a lot of land. So, of course, there's increased potential for conflicts when you have bears occupying those lands. So what did we see? Just a snapshot. You know, looking at just 1 year doesn't tell you a whole lot, but what did we see in 2021? We actively investigated 280 different grizzly bear human conflicts in Wyoming. Most of them were livestock conflicts. Most of them involved bears killing cattle. And as a result of that, there were 30 management removals of grizzly bears in Wyoming, the majority of which occurred outside of that suitable habitat. Okay? We relocated 19 individual bears. And again, most of that occurred on private land. So, trapping bears, relocating bears, the removal of bears on occasion is only a tiny portion of what's actually done, just like what Jeremy talked about. And we just can't talk about, what conflicts we dealt with and what the outcome of the bear was. Because it's a program. It's a conflict program. And we do focus on prevention. You know, if we got a bear in conflict with some sort of human use, you know, prevention, trying to secure those attractants is our first response. Okay? Educating the public, another big portion of what we do. Dan's going to talk a lot about that, of course, but it's huge. And as much as we try to get the message out, and it's some of the best things we do, it's really hard to measure. You know, we can put as much in front of people as we can possibly fathom, spend time and money getting the word out to folks, and still they think, you know, that it doesn't apply to them at times. But anyway, hopefully that doesn't result in a conflict that we end up having to deal with later. So garbage, that's obviously a big type of conflict that we deal with, and it's extremely important to us that we secure garbage throughout the landscape away from bears, because as rare as it is for bears to attack people, we do know that those bears that become habituated, those bears that become food conditioned, and specifically are used to getting garbage from people and associating people with some sort of food source, are the most dangerous type of bears, whether it's black bears, grizzly bears, throughout the world. Those are the most dangerous types of bears. Those are the ones with the most potential to be a serious threat to humans. They become more aggressive and bold in their attempts to get that food. They start causing significant property damage, maybe even in cases like this where the attractants are secured properly, okay? But they know there's something in there, and they're going to do their darndest to get it. Then we have bears that are, for the most part, they're foraging naturally, but in an unnatural place, maybe, like doing damage to whether it's ornamental or an actual type of commercial fruit-producing, apple orchard or something. And that's becoming more and more popular again as bear and human occupancy overlaps. So another tool that we have, besides securing the attractants and educating folks, of course, is a little more active, disruptive stimulus to bears, shooting cracker shells at them, maybe even rubber bullets. And we've had some real good success with that in this area, hopefully preventing conflicts with folks. So, I'm sorry. We do try to work, again, with counties, city ordinances, just ranches and farms to try to work on preventing conflicts in the first place. No matter what a person, what activity they're engaged in, whether it's livestock production, crop production, tourism of any kind, dude ranches, different things, if there's a potential for conflict to occur there, we work with these folks on a regular basis to try to prevent those conflicts from occurring in the first place. And of course, we have a pretty extensive damage compensation program specific to grizzly bears. When cattle, livestock, sheep, poultry, whatever, are verified as killed by grizzly bears, there's some monetary compensation for that. So it increases tolerance a little bit for those critters to be on the landscape, okay? And it costs the sportsmen of Wyoming a significant amount of money. You can see here, last fiscal year, grizzly bear dollar amounts pretty much dominated the amount of damage claims that we pay out on an annual basis. So when all of these tools are employed to try to help people and bears coexist aren't working, well, then we probably have to attempt some sort of capture. All under the direction of the Fish and Wildlife Service. Of course, we relocate those bears if possible, but when that isn't an option, they have to get removed from the population. And again, that's either live placement in some sort of zoo or educational facility, or an actual lethal removal. So, another component of, one of course, the most severe conflicts we deal with that I alluded to with those food conditioned bears is human injury and death. And that's of course, the most serious conflict you can have. Somebody's injured or killed, and often as a result of that too, a bear is killed. And so, we investigate these things to the best of our ability. And the reason that we have a team in place, trained, equipped folks to specifically investigate this type of encounter, because again, one of my first slides was, we have this diverse group of opinions about grizzly bears. And especially, let's say, when a human is killed. Okay, there's a group out there that says, well, it had to be the human's fault, right? I mean, the bear's never at fault. It had to be the human was doing something wrong. Okay, but then you have the other side of the argument, and people say, well, yeah, bears are just, man killers, and that's all they do is kill people. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, and we have to determine exactly what did happen. Sometimes people do make mistakes, and it may be their fault that they stumbled into a situation where they get injured or killed. But on the other hand, there may be some bears out there that are just overly aggressive towards people, and maybe they should be removed from the population. So that's our job, is to determine exactly what happened in these situations, and then educate folks as to what we learned from these encounters and how to prevent them from occurring in the future. So the key points I guess I want to stress are that most of the grizzly bear conflicts we see in Wyoming are on private land, and they're outside of suitable habitat. Mortalities of grizzly bears across the whole ecosystem are on an increasing trend level, but the term and the usage of record mortalities is really out of context. I mean, it's right in line with, increasing trend in numbers and distribution. We have an increasing trend in mortalities, okay? It's a relative increase. And with that, even with the mortalities we're seeing on the increase, we still have an increasing grizzly bear population. They're not negatively impacting the population as a whole. And most of the distribution that we see, again, is outside of that suitable habitat. So, occurring on private lands that have been historically used for human use. That's all I have for you. Any questions? Yes, sir.
You said there were 19 relocations and 30 removals.
Yeah. Overlap between those? Were some of the relocations later removed?
So yeah, the question about relocations and removals, yes, I think I know what you're asking. Some of those definitely could be. I think last year there were 2, as a matter of fact, where a bear was relocated once, okay, and then subsequently caught again and removed. Yes, so there is some overlap there. Thank you.
That's the next one. I could give it for Pat, but he'd probably be frustrated. There was one I emailed this morning. There, 22. That one. Well, that was a smooth transition into my time. No, I appreciate the chance to take advantage of where we're at and the current public interest to talk a little bit about Bearwise. Normally Brian would just present this, but I think with some of the things going on, I wanted to talk about kind of a continuation of our conflict update in Bearwise, Wyoming. Again, Brian already talked about this, but I think it's important to stress. You're going to see several repetitive things in mind too, but again, I'm going to be focusing on this vital component. I used to work in South Dakota. I worked with Lakota a lot, and this term that I have, Mitakuye Oyashin, is all my relations, the interconnectedness of everything in the world. And that's what we have in our section too. We have people with different roles and responsibilities when it comes to research and monitoring, when it comes to conflict management, outreach and education. But all of these things are used together to better our understanding and to try to reduce that conflict potential and try to portray a reality to the public of what's going on, and it's very much a team approach. Everyone has talked about it. We've seen changes through time, and again, we're very fortunate to have this resurgence of carnivores across North America, quite honestly. But the reality of that is increased potential for conflicts. And I always use the term potential because that's where all the work that we do, expertise and experience, can help inform. We can at least try to identify areas that have that potential as they come up. As Danielle noted earlier, Kevin had a lot of that inner insight into prediction of what's going to happen. We use that And again, the last couple of years, the human population growth, increasing bear density, and the COVID angst, you get a real bear party really sometimes. And so we have a Bear Wise Wyoming program as part of our overall large carnivore section conservation of large carnivores. And there's a community program, there's statewide, but it's also consistent with ecosystem messaging, and it's international outreach. Our webpage, which we are also in the process of updating like many other agencies are, this is one of our more heavily visited components of our website, we used to put up our website addresses, and then people are sitting there scribbling, and I thought Frank was brilliant years ago, just Google Bear Wise Wyoming if you're looking for that. It provides a very interactive resource. All the different agencies have very interactive websites that can provide that information, and these serve as a foundation for conservation and management. And I like to remind people that this is not new. Recently, with the increased interest in Jackson, we kind of have to remind people that we have a community program in place right now. And there's going to be more talk about the Bear Smart community program from IGBC. But again, this was from the first job completion report we ever wrote for game and fish for grizzly bears. And Brasino's in the room. He actually wrote that in 2011. But the overall objective of Bear Wise, I'm not going to read all that for you, but again, this was started in 2005. And this includes Jackson. So this has been a community program in place, a collaborative effort for decades now. And again, Brian talked about this. We focus on prevention. We do a ton of electric fencing. We do a ton of education and securing of attractants. This was actually a bear hazed on Tobity several years ago. And then, of course, when we have to, we can still learn. We take the information we need on every animal to build a conflict history. This is local hero Mike Boyce, who is amazing at always shielding his face from the camera, but everybody knows him in the community, and he's the go-to person for all things related to bears in the valley. And again, it's worth repeating. These things are vital. There's one of our former employees hanging up a door hanger. We do that a lot. We've done that a lot in these subdivisions. We had some media discussions last night, and there was a question like, well, what do you do when you go and knock on someone's door that there's a bear in the area? It's basically what we'd say, that there's a bear in the area, remind them to secure their attractants. It's being very open and transparent about the things, but without creating more public interest to draw people to an area. If we go out with a public widespread alert, hey, there's a grizzly bear in this subdivision, there's going to be a caravan of people going to that area too. Things have to be considered. So just a few of the highlights from last year in our Bear Wise program. This great program that Wildlife Services came up with a couple of years ago with these non-lethal specialists. Everyone went a little different route. We worked with local Wildlife Services to try to have people that we could work with to put up a lot of electric fence. And we've done that throughout the valley here. Mike with the Wildlife Services people have done a lot of this. We've done it throughout northwest Wyoming on the Cody front. Everyone's a chicken farmer now. Bears like to break into those, so we're fencing those. We've done a lot of projects with beehives in the central part of the state. That's something that's really helped to increase that infrastructure. I already talked about going door to door. It's nice, as Jeremy mentioned, when we were all secluded, we didn't get the message out that way as much, so we had to find new ways to do it, but we're back to that face-to-face. We do a lot of PSAs and media coverage, and we're always trying to find better ways to reach the public. We try to do these timely. It's just a matter of people actually listen. And there is near constant media coverage of grizzly bears. There's not a month or probably a week that there's not at least one media request to talk about something. I mean, the second the bears go to bed, it seems like there's this yearning to talk about them even more in November and December when some of us want to crawl in our own hole. But that gives us an advantage to get our message out there. We also do a great deal of bear spray giveaways, and I got some slides on that. But there's a local, the apple picking, as Jeremy says, he can get away with it better with the southern drawl. But You know, there's this local project, Roots Kitchen and Cannery, that actually turns into cider that Mike Boyce and the local Bearwise working group is working with them to pick up that and actually produce something from it. And there's just a couple more examples of these structures. That's before the bees get in there, which is, the bull is very smart about trying to do that before the bees are in there, after many, many stings. A chicken coop, and then this is a bear spray giveaway we did in Lander. We had about 120 cans of bear spray we gave away in 4 minutes. It was very well received. And again, I think it's important to talk about adaptation. We're seeing this expansion of potential, so we have to think outside the box and, you know, be adaptive to that as well. But it is important to be consistent in our messaging between agencies, and because when we're talking about some things like the new land development regulations that are going to take place in Jackson, or in Teton County, I'm sorry, then we need to have compliance and enforceability for those to make sense. And it is very much a teamwork approach. And we're always thinking of the future. Again, I mentioned we're updating our website. We're trying to build more, trying to teach people about bear behavior, because it's hard to do. And I think we've done a good job with, most people know the standard things, what you're supposed to do. But if we could get more people to try to understand bear behavior and how their reactions relate to a bear, I think that's important. Those are things we're developing right now. And I just wanted to bring up, this is specific more to the local Jackson area. You know, we're committed to increasing our activities and re-engaging with the public now that the COVID curtain has been pulled back a little bit. We're working closely with the county on the implementation of the bear-resistant infrastructure. On-the-ground securing of attractants, that's a daily job. There's a Teton Conservation District here is working on a good neighbor handbook. We're involved with that, providing bear safety information. We're going to re-engage. We used to do large carnivore workshops every year, sometimes a couple in Jackson. They were always very well attended. We're going to bring those back. And I need to introduce Kyle Garrett, who many of you know. He's worked in all 3 states for the GYE. He's our new Bearwise coordinator. He's going to be working in the community. One thing we're excited about is we're putting together an electric fencing workshop. That's slated for mid-May. We might do a couple. We're also going to video that so we can portray how to correctly erect an electric fence so it works. If they're not set up right, it does no good. Kyle is working on a fruit tree replacement program. I was mentioned yesterday, I believe, and earlier today, the notion of fruit trees and trying to not have those on the landscape if we can, just to take away that type of attractant. And one thing during the Teton County planning, there was a real push to I guess, push the timeline to make these things in place sooner than later. But regardless of regulation or ordinance, we're still doing what we've always done to try to reduce that potential and to keep bears wild and people safe. And again, we have a local Bearwise working group made up of entities from the park, the Jackson Hole Wildlife Federation, Game and Fish, and the county that is, in essence, what the Bear Smart program, that's kind of what IGBC, most of the components within this local program, which have been in place for many years, are what is being discussed in the conceptual framework for Bear Smart community program. And with all these different issues, it requires multiple entity involvement. We're trying to hire a person within that organization to help spread that message and that consistent message across. And we're trying to project unity. I think there's a lot of people that try to pit agencies against each other, but we might have some different philosophies and viewpoints, but we're all in it for bears and people in the end. I added to end with this. I'm not bashing the place we're staying. It's a beautiful hotel, but I've had this weird feeling in my stomach since we started staying here. And so this is outside one of the doors at the hotel here. There's bears looking in windows, and but it just kind of, it shows you what we're up against, because, this is a real picture from Jackson with a black bear on top of the house. Little things like that are things that we still have to think about toward the future, and not promoting those types of things. I took that picture last night. I just had this weird feeling in my stomach over there. It's cool to see that, but little things like that, is that promoting a habituated bear in town type of a thing. And I wanted to take a moment to thank Dan Bjornley. He got the award yesterday. There's people that spend their whole careers boasting about what they do, and then there's people who let their actions speak and change like the world around them for what they do. And Dan Bjornley is the latter very much. So it's going to be hard. He's been part of this since 2000 for Wyoming. He's the face of grizzly bear and black bear conservation management, and we're excited for him to go to a new adventure, but boy, he's going to be missed. I want to thank you, Dan. So, and thank Kevin, of course, too. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Questions?
No, it's the one you had up for Dan previously. Yes, thank you.
Wind River.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pat Nelica. I work with Fish and Wildlife Service in Lander, Wyoming, and I'm here today to present a conflict report from the Wind River Indian Reservation. And you can see the flag line down below there. There's the Eastern Shoshone, Northern Arapaho tribes that reside there on Wind River. There's also the Tribal Fish and Game Department. They handle the law enforcement side of activities on Wind River. And then the Fish and Wildlife Service, we assist the tribes with all things fish and wildlife related on Wind River, of which grizzly bears are a part of. And so you might be asking, well, why am I up here representing the tribes? And the short answer to that is that I'm not. I'm just here presenting this information for the tribes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that relationship here in just a minute. So I like to show this slide. It's a little dated. You can see Wind River here in the lower right corner. It's the size Yellowstone National Park. It's a very large landscape. This grizzly bear distribution has since filled in. I think this is from 2018. But you can see that there's a considerable amount of occupied habitat on Wind River. And to give you a little background and zoom in a little closer here, you can see the DMA line. Here and here is DMA. The reservation was established in 1868 by treaty. It was actually the last treaty that was signed with tribes in the United States by the federal government. As I mentioned, it's a very large landscape, over 2 million acres in size. And the nice thing about Wind River is that the landscape is still very much intact in terms of tribal control. Over 1.8 million acres of the 2.2 million is tribally controlled, and it's held in what's called trust land. And I'll explain that a little bit. So every federal agency has a trust responsibility to tribes. When treaties were signed, there was that trust relationship established. And in 1941, the newly established Fish and Wildlife Service signed a national MOU with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. BIA is the primary agency that provides services to tribal entities. But in 41, there was an MOU signed that said basically BIA would like the newly established Fish and Wildlife Service to provide fish and wildlife, fish stocking, etc., those types of services to the tribes. And so that's why Fish and Wildlife Service is there. Our office is rather unique in the sense that we're embedded in a sense with the tribes, and that doesn't happen around the country. But there's a history there that I won't get into now, but at least on Wind River, we're there, and we're there on a daily basis assisting the tribes. Our assistance actually goes back even further. We did provide fish all the way back to the 1910s, so we've been there for well over 100 years in some capacity. So as you can see from this graph, this goes back to 2002, and it lists all the different conflicts that have been reported to Fish and Wildlife Service or Tribal Fish and Game. And yes, you can see the frequency on the left side. It's single digits. We don't get a lot of conflicts. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a fair number of bears on the reservation. That northwest corner, what's called Crow Creek or the Owl Creek Mountains, there's some pretty significant bear density there. But as has been mentioned in previous programs, you know, there's very few people that use that backcountry. And so as a result, there's not a whole lot of conflicts. We don't have a lot of human presence or human developments on Wind River that occur in prime grizzly bear habitat. Also, there's a significant amount of underreporting, I think, that goes on, but you know, it's difficult to get those unreported events recorded. You can see in 2021 there were only 3 conflicts, one which was cattle related, cattle depredation, and 2 that were human safety or a food reward. And going back to this map, you can see the cattle depredation occurred up in the Crow Creek area. That was just one beef calf that was killed by a bear. Producer was notified, no further reports of any further depredations occurred, so that was it for that particular incident. No further action was taken. The human safety one here in food reward was at a ranch where a sow with 2 yearlings was coming in for several nights into an old burn pile, and that was cleaned up by the property owner, and subsequently the bear didn't return and no further incidents occurred. And then the last one down here was a charge and reported shots fired. Supposedly the bear was hit. We investigated the scene, and none of the evidence corroborated what the reporting party had indicated, and the individual was known to embellish, and so we think that was probably a bogus report. And so this graphic just shows the other incidents. It reflects the table that I showed you just a moment ago. And you can see that a number of encounters like what Brian had just talked about are occurring outside the DMA and in other areas of still suitable, but to some degree, but certainly not as suitable as the habitat that's within the DMA boundary. So with that, that's what I have for our conflict from Wind River. I did also want to say I really appreciate Dan Bjornley and all he's done for the reservation. They're located in Lander. I am as well. And since 2006, Dan's assisted us and the tribes with research captures, and really appreciate his friendship over the years and wish him and his family all the best in their new adventure. And also would just like to thank Brian and Dan Thompson and Justin Clapp for their assistance with conflict management and grizzly bear management on the reservation as well. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Grand Teton.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Justin Swabidis, and I'm the bear biologist with Grand Teton National Park. I'll be presenting our conflicts for last year for the park, as well as the John D. Rockefeller Jr. Memorial Parkway. We had 5 conflicts involving grizzly bears in the park and the parkway last year. One of those occurred in the Flag Ranch area within the parkway. The other 4 conflicts occurred on our southern boundary in the southern part of the park. One of those conflicts involved property damage to a residential structure. The other 4 conflicts involve garbage rewards with grizzly bears. The first bear conflict occurred in early June in the Flag Ranch area. A 2-year-old male grizzly entered a campsite where the visitors had left their food and other items out in the campsite. And the bear did obtain a significant trash reward from that campsite. Second conflict occurred in Late August, this was a 4-year-old male grizzly bear who had been involved in numerous conflicts south of the park on private lands. The bear entered the park during one night at our Granite Canyon trailhead and was able to compromise several of our bear-resistant trash cans in that parking area, was able to obtain a trash reward from those cans. And as you can see in the lower photo, the bear also climbed over several vehicles in that parking lot, and based on the paw prints, attempted to make entry into that vehicle, but was unsuccessful. The following night, that same bear made contact with an unoccupied residential cabin closer to the Moose area. During investigation, we determined the bear broke out the kitchen window and was reaching inside trying to obtain groceries, etc. off of the kitchen counter. But during our investigation, the bear did not enter that cabin. It couldn't get through the window. And then in October, we had 2 conflicts involving a 4-year-old female grizzly bear. Again, this bear had been involved in numerous conflicts outside of the park on private lands. In this particular incident, the bear was documented, again, breaking into a bear-resistant trash can and was able to manipulate it enough in order to gain a trash reward from it. I'll note that on this, during our investigation, we determined that this particular trash can had not been anchored adequately to the ground, which allowed the bear the opportunity to manipulate the trash can and thus get a trash reward from it. So we're in the process in the park of conducting a review of all our trash cans to make sure that none others are inadequately anchored to the ground. Several days later, that bear was continuing to display escalating conflict behavior and tipped a bear-resistant dumpster over in the Moose area and was able to get a trash reward from that as well. That covers the 5 conflicts that we had in the park and the parkway last year. I'd like to give a big thank you to Mike Boyce in the back. We work quite closely with Mike in coordinating bears that are moving back and forth across our boundaries. So really appreciate all your efforts, Mike. And just briefly to touch upon some of our accomplishments in the park. So since 2007, we've used the Wildlife Brigade, which is a team primarily composed of volunteers to help us with bear efforts within the park. Last year, the Wildlife Brigade responded to 478 bear jams within the park, and half of those involved grizzly bears. The team has grown considerably since 2007, and as of last year was 29 volunteers strong, and those volunteers collectively contributed over 9,500 hours to bear conservation efforts within the park. So they help us facilitate safe viewing opportunities for both the bears and people that have the opportunity to observe bears in the wild. They help us patrol developed areas to secure unattended attractants. And then they also provide a lot of education and outreach with the public and are generally well received by park visitors. So we truly couldn't do it without them, so we really appreciate their efforts. And then finally, starting in 2008, the park partnered with the Grand Teton National Park Foundation to start a comprehensive bear box installation program. Since then, we've installed over 1,000 bear boxes at almost every campsite within the front country of Grand Teton, as well as many of the developed areas. So as of last year, we are now have a bear box in every campsite in 5 of our 6 front country campgrounds, and we are currently on track to finish that final campground within the next 2 years. So again, a big thank you to all of the donors who have supported those efforts through the Grand Teton National Park Foundation. And that's all I have. Are there any questions? Yeah?
The 5 conflict bears, what was the result? Removal or relocation?
Yep. So the first conflict bear, we initially relocated that bear. The bear would later return to the front country areas. It stayed out of conflict for about 2 months, and then it exited the park and got into conflicts outside of the park and was ultimately removed. The second grizzly bear, the 4-year-old male, after breaking into that residential cabin, breaking the window out, that bear would return to private lands outside of the park and ultimately be removed. And then the female 4-year-old, again, caused other conflicts outside of the park, and we ultimately removed that bear in coordination with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Wyoming Game and Fish. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Yellowstone National Park.
Okay, my name's Kerry Gunther. I'm the bear management biologist in Yellowstone National Park. I would like to say thank you to Kevin Fry as well. Kevin and I worked together for over 30 years, and in my career I've gone through 5 bear-caused human fatalities, and every time one of those happened, Kevin was the first one to call and offer his assistance or any equipment, traps that I would need to borrow. So Kevin was always great to work with. And he was also one of the coolest guys under pressure that I've ever seen. When he was cool as a cucumber when charged by a bear. And sometimes I think that his cool demeanor is what caused the bear to stop the charge. Yellowstone National Park for 2021. So Yellowstone National Park in 2021, we had a very busy year. We had 4.86 million visits. It was our busiest year on record, and each month from May through September set a monthly record for visitation. 95% of those visits occurred from May through October, which is the very same time period that bears are out and active on the landscape. And during that peak period, May through October, we were receiving over 25,000 visits per day. Next slide. We also, in our roadside campgrounds, we had over 557,000 overnight stays in our 11 campgrounds. Well, 10 campgrounds. The Norris campground was closed last year. And then in our backcountry campsites, we have a designated backcountry campsite system. We had over 42,000 overnight stays in our backcountry campsites. Now, that much visitation sounds really bad, and sometimes it seems a bit chaotic, but we actually manage it pretty well. Yellowstone National Park is over 2.2 million acres, and less than 1% of that is paved over for roads or development. So most of the park is still wild backcountry. 92% of the park is proposed for wilderness designation, and under Park Service policy, we manage that so as not to preclude that designation in the future. So almost all our visitation is in the developed areas and along the roadside. So despite almost 5 million visits, Yellowstone is still actually a pretty wild and pristine place. Next slide. So like all the agencies have shown, bear management is really management actions designed to prevent conflicts from occurring before they occur. This particular photo, there was a carcass about 10 yards off the road, and these 2 grizzlies are fighting over it. So we take a lot of preemptive management actions to reduce conflicts in the park. Next slide. So first of all, we have a program, just like Grand Teton, where our foundation, Yellowstone Forever, raises funding to install bear-proof food storage lockers into our roadside campgrounds. They raised a little over $200,000 last year, and we installed 187 bear boxes in the park. We use YCC crews, youth conservation crews, as well as MCC crews, which is a state-run youth program, and as well as MCC young adult crews. And then we also use a program, Groundwork USA, which is a group where they bring in inner city kids from some of the worst neighborhoods in the country to help us install bear boxes. And it's also a great way for us to teach conservation and appreciation for national parks to some of these kids that would never have an opportunity to come to Yellowstone otherwise. So again, we now have 61% of the park's front country roadside campsites have a bear box. We have 1,907 total campsites in the park, and we've installed 1,162 bear boxes to date. And then this year, 187 was the most bear boxes we ever installed. This year we're shooting for 200. Next slide. So this shows some of the crews, the kids working on the bear boxes. All our bear boxes are tested at the Grizzly Discovery Center. They do a great job for us so that we make sure we're really putting in a bear-proof food storage locker. Next slide. Yellowstone National Park, we implemented a new bear management program in 1970 where we really cleaned up the park. Prior to that, we had 138 property damages a year, 48 bear-inflicted human injuries per year. So we were the worst in the ecosystem as far as conflicts, as far as bears that we were killing in management actions, and we worked really hard to clean that up. One of the things we did, in addition to food storage lockers, was we went to a designated backcountry campsite system. So this, there's the camp, the tent set up. This is the fire ring, and then here you can see the food hung. So we have 300 backcountry campsites. Every one of those campsites has either a food storage pole or a food storage locker, and that has really cleaned up our backcountry as far as bear-human conflicts. Next slide. So of the 300 campsites, we have food storage poles in 260 of those and food storage lockers in 40 of those. So again, we're providing a food storage device in every campsite. And what we found is if you make it easy and convenient for visitors, they will camp in a bear-proof manner. If it's difficult, like a lot of, especially now these through hikers, they hike many miles, long hours. They get in their campsite well after dark. It's hard for anybody to hang food properly from a tree if you have to rig your own food hanging device. And so by providing it, we've made it easy and convenient for people. And so like I said, it's really cleaned up our backcountry. Next slide. Another part of our management is posting warnings when there's carcasses or concentrated bear activity near a trail. So last summer we had 18 incidents where we posted strong bear warnings on trails or campsites in our backcountry. Next slide. And then we also implement a lot of short-term temporary closures. So if there's a carcass in a campsite and we're not able to move it, sometimes we'll close the campsite or temporarily close a trail. Sometimes we'll reroute trails. But so we actually spend a lot of time working. We have a contact information for everybody because they have to have a permit to camp in the backcountry. And so we actually contact people by phone, in-reach devices, send people in, and so we move people around to try to keep them out of trouble when there's concentrated bear activity like on a carcass near a trail or a backcountry campsite. Carcass management is a big part of what we do, just like all the other agencies. Last year we moved 105 large mammal carcasses, and for us, bison, it's a pretty big thing to try to move, but we do it. So again, 105 large mammal carcasses that we moved, and if we don't move them, then we'll get situations with sometimes 6 to 8 bears or more close to a road or development. And so by moving those carcasses, we reduce the concentration of bears, which reduces the likelihood that somebody's going to have a close encounter with a bear at a carcass. Next slide. So we moved 32 elk last year and 31 bison, 28 mule deer, and then a variety of other species. So it's a lot of work moving that many carcasses in the summer, but it really is a big part of our program and again helps prevent conflicts from occurring. Next slide. Management hazing. We use a variety of tools, anything from paintball guns to shotgun-fired rounds. We use cracker shells, rubber bullets, and beanbag rounds to keep bears out of our developments. And if you're consistent enough, some bears will actually learn to stay out of the development. Most of our bears, what we find is they're coming into the developments to eat natural foods, graze on clover in the lawns, choke cherries, that kind of stuff, or they're just passing through, the developments, sitting between the way they want to go for the shortest route. But we do have some success in getting these bears to learn to avoid the development and go around with real consistent hazing. Next slide. Bear jams is our biggest management challenge. So we've pretty much solved our food condition bear problems. We're pretty well bear proofed, although that's an ongoing forever thing that we have to do to keep conflicts low. But what happens when you have low bear mortality and high visitation is bears are really smart. They're very behaviorally flexible, and they learn that all these visitors are just kind of benign background noise. And so they'll habituate to the presence of people, and then that creates these large bear jams when visitors want to stop and view and photograph bears along the roads. So this is a typical bear jam in Yellowstone National Park. There's a bear just down in the meadow. There's probably 100 people there, and trying to keep traffic moving so we don't get road rage, and keep people from approaching the bears or following the bears or encircling the bears because everybody wants a front row seat is a big staff time commitment. We had 342 grizzly bear jams, 479 black bear jams. 4 jams were when they filled out the report, they forgot to report the species. So a total of 825 bear jams last summer, which again, that's a big workload. Next slide. So park staff were present at 221, or 65% of the bear jams. For a lot of years, we were present at 85% of our bear jams, but now with both an increasing bear population and increasing visitation, it's tough to get to every bear jam. Like, for instance, in the Tower District, we may have more bear jams in a day than we have staff on that day. So sometimes there's bear jams where people are just out there on their own interacting with the bear along the road. And this is the case. This was an unmanaged bear jam where somebody took a photo and sent it to me, and this is kind of scary. This lady couldn't have stayed in her car and taken the picture, but she got out with what's a pretty big, good-sized grizzly bear there to take a picture. Next slide. Black bear jams, we had 479. We had park staff present at 420 of those, or 88%. One of the reasons I think we had more black bear jams staffed last year was most of our black bear jams all occur in one district of the park, and historically we've always had a lot of jams there, so they're really set up in that Tower Falls area with volunteers and staff to manage jams, and then some of the other areas of the park we don't have quite as much dedicated staff, and so just more of the bear jams in that district got managed, and more of those happen to be black bears in that area. Looking at staff hours spent managing bear jams, again, for grizzly bears, staff put in 964 hours managing bear jams, an average of 4.4 hours per bear jam. Black bears, 1,463 hours, staff hours, average of 3.5 hours per bear jam. So combined, we put in well over 2,000 hours just managing roadside bear jams in the park last year. And again, this is a very well-managed bear jam. We got people parking on one side, but we're putting the people on the opposite side of the road from the bear. I got a ranger here, making sure nobody sneaks up. And it's a tough duty. Sometimes it's really rewarding. You'll get a family from New Jersey, and it's the best thing they've ever seen. But sometimes while you're keeping the crowd contained in one area, the people down at this end are sneaking around, trying to get behind you. So people are always trying to beat you at a bear jam. So it can take 3 or 4 people really to manage a bear jam in a way that you need to. One of the things we want to start looking into is we realize we can't keep, it's going to be hard to keep adding additional staff now. My division chief, Jennifer Carpenter, got me 2 extra seasons this year for bear jams. But we realize with housing and everything, it's hard to just keep adding staff. It's just not practical. So we need to develop better ways to promote proper bear viewing etiquette. among our visitors. Now, some of our regulars that come to bear jams every day are very good, and they kind of self-police. And then some of those ones that lead us to believe they're really helping us out, when you're not there and you show up and they don't know you're there, and then they're the one closest to the bear. So we're just trying to get the message out and try to get visitors kind of self-managing at bear jams more, because we know we can't be at every bear jam every day. Next slide. So again, we're just trying to get people to respect these bears. The bears really just want to be left alone. We have a 100-yard rule where you're not allowed to approach or remain within 100 yards of a bear. We're trying to get better compliance with that among our visitors. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, looking at grizzly bear human encounters, last summer we had 53 reported incidents where visitors had encounters with grizzly bears in the backcountry. Next slide. And of those, the bears responded 9 times by charging, so about 17% of the reported encounters resulted in a bear charging, and only in one of those 9 incidents where a bear charged did the bear make contact, and that resulted in an injury, not life-threatening, but a pretty good bite to the leg on that guy. He was out birding at 5 in the morning, ran into a female with cubs on a trail by himself. Next slide. Bear spray deployments. We had 4 incidents where people reported they had to deploy their bear spray, and grizzlies did not make contact in any of those 4 incidents, so the bear spray at least appeared to be successful. Sometimes the bear would maybe lead on its own even if you didn't spray the bear. Sometimes it's just the noise of the spray and the bear leaves. So how many of those is actually from the bear getting bear spray in his eyes, I don't know, but 4 incidents where bear spray was used, and no injuries in those 4 encounters. Next slide. We do surveys. We've been doing a lot of educational work trying to increase the proportion of people carrying bear spray. We started this after we had 2 fatalities in 2011, and so we really started pushing bear spray with different campaigns. We got Jeff Bridges to be on a poster for us. And so we also began monitoring how many people were carrying bear spray to see how effective these educational efforts were. For backpackers, we're seeing pretty good compliance with the recommendation. 53% of the individual backpackers and 83% of the groups of backpackers had at least one member carrying bear spray. Then with day hikers, we're not seeing nearly as good of compliance with the recommendation. 23% of the individual day hikers carried bear spray last year, and then 52% of the groups of day hikers had at least one member that carried bear spray. The reason for the difference, we think, is backpackers have to get a permit to go on their backcountry hike, and in that permit process they have to watch a little safety video that talks about bear spray and its importance, and then they have a one-on-one talk with a ranger about bears and bear spray. And some of our other educational surveys indicate that that one-on-one contact with a uniformed ranger is where people really are gaining their safety information, and posters and videos and all that stuff, you don't get near as much compliance with those cheaper kind of media. It's more expensive to have a one-on-one talk with somebody, but those cheaper medias aren't as successful at getting people to change their behavior. Next slide. We also look at group size. We recommend hikers in Yellowstone hike with groups of 3 or more people, and our data clearly shows it's usually solo hikers or people in just groups of 2 that get injured by bears. It's very rare for groups of 3 or more to be injured by bears. So we also survey our backcountry visitors for group size. Last year, our most common group size among backpackers was solo hikers or groups of 4 or more, whereas day hikers, the average group size was 2. And it doesn't seem to matter what education we put into group size. People hike with the size of the party they come to the park with. It's not like you can just go rent an extra hiker or something. So I'm not sure education is going to change this much. Next slide. Looking at, so that's all the things we do to reduce conflicts. Now looking at conflicts in 2021, we had 2 incidents of property damage with no food reward. one incident where human foods were obtained, and then the one bear-inflicted human injury for a total of 4 conflicts. The property damages, the one was pretty benign. A guy it was between 11:30 and midnight. He was coming around a corner in the dark in his vehicle with his family. There was a female with cubs crossing the road. He slammed on the brakes, stopped without hitting the bear, and the mother bear got a little pissed and charged the vehicle and slapped the driver's side door a couple times, denting in the door and actually breaking the metal a little bit. So that, that's pretty benign. You can't really blame the bear for that. Then we had one incident where one of our plastics recycling containers, it's on a 6-inch thick slab of cement buried into the ground. A grizzly came in, ripped it out of the ground and tossed it around, beat on it, and the container held, and so the bear didn't get any reward out of the recycling container, but he damaged the container so much we couldn't get the door open anymore. So that was a little more of an aggressive conflict, but the bear did not get a food reward. And then we had one incident with a food reward where a backpacker came in the afternoon into his campsite, and when he got there, there was a grizzly bear in his campsite eating food scraps out of the fire pit that the previous party had left. So the bear didn't really do anything aggressive to get that food, it just kind of stumbled on it, but the guy was able to get out to us on his inReach device, and we found him another campsite about 4 miles away, asked him if he could hike that far still, because he had already had a long day, and he said, yeah, he didn't want to sleep in that campsite with that bear. So he went on to the next campsite, and we closed that campsite for a couple weeks and didn't have any further incidents. And then we had the one human injury with the birder early in the morning hiking on the Beaver Ponds Trail for a total of 4 conflicts. So pretty good considering we used to average over 100 a year in the old days. Next slide. So this shows our long-term data on human injuries and fatalities and property damages. So the purple part of the bar is property damages and incidents where bears get anthropogenic foods. The yellow part of the bar graph there is injuries and fatalities. So you can see in the late 60s and the 70s, we were still averaging quite a few conflicts per year. But then we implemented our new bear management plan in 1970. We've really reduced that. And so this is the average number of human grizzly bear conflicts by grizzly bears per year. And you can see since 2010 now, we're really at our lowest levels ever for conflicts in the park. Next slide. Management captures and relocation. We didn't even set a trap for any problem bears last year. We didn't really have very many conflicts. The bear that ripped up the recycling bin, we put up some cameras and stuff and didn't have any more incidents. That bear moved on, so we didn't relocate any bears. Next slide. Management removals of conflict bears. We didn't have any either because we had so few conflicts. And one thing I would like to say, when I started my career, occasionally, the last thing a bear manager wants to do is remove a bear. We spend our whole time trying to prevent conflicts, and all the agencies put in a ton of work to do that. And so we feel like we fail when we have to remove a bear, but sometimes it is necessary. And we, in recent years, last decade or so, you remove a bear, and you'll get hate mail from around the world, and people calling you everything, and you get some thinly veiled death threats, and it's just crazy because we're doing everything we can to conserve grizzly bears, and then for these agency people to get this much flack when they do have to remove a bear. And everyone always, they call and say, why don't you move the bear to the backcountry? And it's like there's this mythical Big Bear Happy Valley where bear foods are abundant and there's no people, so a bear can't get in trouble, and there's only a low density of bears, so you can put a bear there and it's not going to get beat up, and it's going to live and raise its cubs and be live happily ever after. This is a very human-dominated landscape, the whole lower 48 states, and so there is no Big Bear Happy Valley. When you fly over in a helicopter looking for a place to release a bear, there's people up almost every drainage you can find. And even if you find an open drainage, well, that bear can just pop over the hill. So, I don't know, I guess I'm just asking, be considerate of your bear managers, because they have a very tough job They're putting in a ton of work. You know, we're on call 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and they don't deserve the flack they get when they occasionally have to remove a problem bear. Next slide. So this is our management actions in summary. You know, it sounds like 4 conflicts. Well, what did Gunther do all summer? But 414 management actions to prevent conflict. So we're very busy. Even if our bears are behaving, we're very busy. We're out there every day. I have a crew of 8 people that do a great job. Like I say, they're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And we're out there doing these things to prevent conflicts from occurring. Next slide. Vehicle strike mortality, we had 1 adult male hit and killed on Highway 191 where it runs through the park last year. Highway 191 is the only road in the park with a high speed limit. It's 55 miles per hour there. So we tend to see a little more roadkill on that road. Most of the park roads, speed limits are 35 to 45 miles per hour. But Highway 191, again, a little faster. And speed is what seems to correlate really well with roadkill. The faster vehicles are going, the more roadkill you're going to get. Next slide. Looking at long-term human-caused grizzly bear mortality in the park, since 2009, so from 2009 through 2021, we've had 13 human-caused grizzly bear mortalities, an average of 1 per year. And those mortalities, vehicle strikes were about a third, so 4 of those were vehicle strike mortalities. Management removals from developed sites, we only had to remove 1 in that time period. And then most of our management removals were due to backcountry conflicts, and 6 of those 8 backcountry removals, it wasn't that the bears were coming into campsites and damaging property or that kind of stuff. These were incidents where there was encounters and people got killed and bears consumed them, and so we removed those bears, not out of retribution, but to ensure that they didn't kill and eat people in the future. Cubs learn from their mothers, so in those cases we had 2 incidents where we removed adult females that each had 2 kids. And so that's the majority of those backcountry conflicts. Next slide. So this looks at, this graph is the number of grizzly bear mortalities per year, per decade for these different time periods, and the type of mortality. So the purple is human-caused mortality, the green is natural causes, and the yellow is where we couldn't determine the cause, where we just found a bear dead. But you can see in the early days in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, almost all our mortality in Yellowstone National Park was human-caused, and that's the vast majority is management removals of conflict bears, and then a few roadkills thrown in. Since the 1980s, since we cleaned up the park in the 70s, more than half of our more than half of our bear mortalities are now due to natural causes. So Yellowstone National Park is a place where bears actually can live out their lives, lose their teeth, and die of old age quite a bit of the time. But even with as clean as we have the park, we're still having to remove some bears. And I don't think anywhere where you have bears and people, you'll be able to get away from that. There's some bears that just can't live in a society that's dominated by humans. Next bear, or slide. So the risk of bear attack, bears get this pretty bad reputation that they're just out there to kill and eat you. When you look at the data, bears are really very tolerant of people. So most of our visitors never leave the roadsides in our developments. And so for visitors that stay in the front country areas, we see 1 grizzly bear inflicted injury per about 65.8 million visits. So pretty low odds. For those that camp in our roadside campgrounds, a little more hardy visitor, we'll see 1 injury in about a little over 28 million overnight stays. So still incredibly low odds. For those camping in the backcountry, the really rugged visitor, we see 1 injury in about 1.8 million overnight stays in our backcountry. So again, incredibly low numbers. Hiking, and this is harder to estimate because we don't have estimates of day hikers and stuff, but looking at backpackers that are not injured in their campsite but are injured while they're hiking to their campsite, we see about 1 injury per about 300,000 backcountry recreation days. So still pretty low odds. And then I've been looking also at the number of encounters reported, and we see one grizzly bear attack per 91 backcountry encounters. And I think this is biased really high, though, because in a benign encounter, when you're hiking and you run into a bear and it runs away, well, I think most people don't even report that. So I think more people report it if they get hurt by a bear. And so I think, again, that estimate there is biased a little bit high. Next slide. So again, looking at grizzly bear inflicted human injuries per 1 million visits per decade. So this is kind of on a per capita basis. And you can see the current, since 2010, again, we're at our lowest level ever. So even with increasing visitation and the bear populations, visitation is increasing by hundreds of thousands, whereas the bear population is increasing by a couple dozen. But still, despite those two factors, we're at our lowest rate of bear-inflicted human injuries in the history of the park, at least since we've been keeping records. Next slide. So again, we had our first grizzly bear emerge from its den on March 7th. And so we just want to remind everybody to be alert, hike in groups of 3 or more, and carry bear spray, and be safe out there. Next slide. I could answer any questions.
Carrie, I'm Katie Stevens, these are just curiosity questions, maybe for Kim, but have you guys, recognizing your numbers are low for conflict, do you offer folks the opportunity to buy bear spray at entry points, and or have you talked about backcountry day use permits that would help you connect with people in the same way you do for overnight? And then my last question is, do you guys collar at a different frequency given the number of people that are in the ecosystem, beyond what's needed for population estimates?
Okay, the first question about bear spray. Our general stores and gift shops all sell bear spray. We have a bear spray rental program based in the center of the park. We've been trying to expand that to the Old Faithful area as well. And we just had a new bear spray contractor sold to somebody else, so we'll have a new person. But it's a really good program. They'll demonstrate with inert bear spray how to use it. And we actually had a guy who's, I think the kid was 9. It was actually a family of 4, which was rare. Ran into a bear. Dad had the bear spray. He only knew how to use it because he rented it, and they gave him the demonstration. Him, his wife, and his teenage son all stayed together. The 9-year-old ran, and the bear ran after and pulled down the 9-year-old. Mom and dad, like heroes, ran up with the bear spray, sprayed it, and the bear left the kid alone. He just had pretty minor injury, but again, that was all due to the bear spray rental program. So we are looking to expand that in the park. What was the second question?
Day use backcountry permits?
Yeah, we haven't thought of that yet, going to permits. It's just...
It's kind of a matter of math.
Yeah.
This is laborious enough. They do a really good job on the overnight, but it's staff intensive. So you start talking about 10,000 people per day. You don't know where they're going. How do you do that? That's pretty tough.
Makes sense.
In Yellowstone, we're fairly spread out. So at one point we had 12 backcountry permit issuing stations. I don't think we have that anymore, but it's just to staff that many places throughout the summer. And our estimates of day hiking is that it's about probably 14 to 15 times what our overnight backcountry use is. So it would be an incredible workload. And then the last question was about collaring bears.
Yeah, do you collar at a higher frequency because of the bear jams and number of people in concentrated places?
We don't. So most of the collaring we do with the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team. We help them out when they're doing research trapping. We'll collar bears for management. Occasionally, if we move one, we don't move very many bears anymore. Roadside bears, even when research trapping, we specifically try not to get them because the photographers in public like to see those bears in their photos without collars. Even though I know Photoshop now you can get rid of a collar pretty easy, but we specifically try not to collar those bears that the public sees every day like that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks to everybody. That's really interesting to see how we're managing conflicts all across the ecosystem. We're a little bit behind, so I think we're going to take a break right now. We'll have Frank start us out when we come back. So it's 10:20. Let's get back together at 10:35. I know that was a little short, but we'll keep rolling. So we're going to have Frank talk to us a little bit. Always interesting stuff.
We'll see. Good morning, everyone. Frank Romano with the team leader of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team. We'll provide a quick recap of our status update from last fall, and then we'll spend most of the presentation here on talking about our progress on the integrated population models. Just want to recognize the other 15 members of the Interagency Grizzly Bear Study Team. We've had a few changes and probably have a few more changes coming up. Quick recap from 2021. Population status. Remember, we moved towards a slight change to our Chow-2 population estimation using a distance rule to identify unique females with cubs that is shorter than what we used in the past, 16 kilometers. That results in an estimate after applying a smoother for time trend, an estimate of 84 females with cubs. And that translated into a total population estimate of 1,069. Remember that number when we later start talking about IPM numbers. Mortality rates are relatively low, 5.7%, and for independent age females, so those females that are 2 years older, and independent males, it's 8.1%. Those are below what we have calculated to be sustainable mortality rates for the population. And interesting and important point to make is that we monitor the population within the demographic monitoring area. We do keep track of mortalities outside the monitoring area, and more and more of those are occurring outside the demographic monitoring area. That's 33%, and that trend has been there for a while now. Most of the causes for mortality are related to side conflict, self-defense, and livestock. Food supply was actually pretty decent, given that I think most of us would consider last year to be kind of a drought year. And we have some quantitative assessments of food supply in terms of whitebark pine, for example. Some other measures are a little more qualitative, but we do have a quantitative way of assessing food supply by just looking at the bears themselves. And if you look at percent body fat over time throughout the active season last year, these are all the body fat measurements we have of handled bears, and Julian Day at the bottom. The blue line represents 20%. That's kind of a threshold for females, for pregnant females to actually reproduce in the den the following winter. And when you look at when that threshold was exceeded by all handled bears, that's about the end of August. So already at the end of August, these animals were in good shape. Females already had reached that threshold for reproduction. So the bears are telling us that they're finding the calories, even in a year like last year, where again we had kind of a drought year. The trend based on a new, remember in our Chow-2 reassessment report we presented last year, we have now a different method of looking at trend over time and some additional tools to assess trend. And so this is the trend of the number of females estimated number of females with cubs. The blue dots indicate years with statistically significant increase in population size and population growth. The little orange ones, those are years where there's no statistical evidence for that. So most of this time series shows continued population growth, statistically supported. Several others this morning already mentioned range expansion. It's pretty phenomenal when you look at that change since 1990. About 4% annual increase in occupied range. 98% of the DMA is now occupied, and 31% of occupancy is now outside the DMA. And as Brian mentioned this morning, quite a proportion is now on private land, and that being more than all the 3 park units combined. That's a pretty large area, obviously. So let's switch to the efforts that we've put into the last couple of years into integrated population models to enhance and advance our demographic monitoring program. That's been quite an effort, just like the Chow 2 reassessment took quite an effort. I see this as a progression and continuation of those efforts. So I'll provide a quick review of what our current system of population estimation is with a couple of slides. Then we'll give a little bit of an overview on integrated population models, or IPM, and then our application of the IPM to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Talk a little bit about the structure of the model, and some, I think for the first time, that we'll show some substantial results from that. And then we'll talk about what are some of the considerations and final steps here. So our traditional approach, and this I think shows white, but it should be a color there for a circle. Our traditional approach is we have kind of separate ways of estimating parameters related to reproduction, count data, like the Chow 2 and survival data. We then put that into some matrix algebra and actually get population estimates of abundance and growth out of that. That's a good system that works, but there are some limitations. So the foundation for our current system is a workflow that we developed back in 2012 that we reported in our demographic workshop report. And that's what you see here. It's a complicated picture. We're not going to go through that, of course, but the basis for that is the Chow 2 population estimator based on that new distance rule of 16 kilometers to identify unique females with cubs. Like I said, it's a good system. It provides us reliable inference about the population, but there are some limitations. And one is that we don't necessarily get annual estimates of vital rates. And what I mean with that is rates like survival, reproductive parameters, and things like that. There's also some limitations in fully propagating the uncertainty in the parameters that we see. And there's kind of separate processes for these different parameters. There's different places where those parameters are input here, but they're kind of separate from one another. Integrated population models actually could improve that process by jointly analyzing data on population size and demographic parameters at the same time. And we'll go into that a little bit more here with some examples. So we have parameters like, one parameter of interest, of course, is annual abundance. That's what we report to this committee every fall. And that is, of course, has to be driven by survival of different segments of the population, by reproduction and things like that. So obviously, these are all interdependent. You have losses and gains. You have gains from reproduction. You have losses from mortality. Those are all interconnected, and they all happen at the same time. But yet, at this point, we're kind of estimating those separately. The IPM integrates that all basically into one system. And that's really the elegance and the beauty of that approach. Here again, that should be great, it doesn't show up, but the whole point of one big advantage of an IPM approach is something that we refer to as an overlapping consensus. So kind of think of this as 3 overlapping circles. We have estimates for reproduction, abundance, and survival. The goal is really that the best estimates are going to be in that area where those estimates all overlap and agree with one another. And that is a different way of thinking about population monitoring. And some more recent statistical approaches have allowed us to actually start looking into that and taking that approach. The benefits in general of IPMs are that the precision and accuracy of parameter estimates increases. Those estimates are typically weighted by the quality and the amount of data that you put in. So if you have really good high quality data for some parameters, those will be weighted more in the model than others. So for example, in our case, we have really good data on telemetry monitoring, survival, and reproduction data, for example, come out of that. Those will be highly weighted in the overall approach. It also allows us to look at changes in the population and the structure, and the population structure changes over time. So it actually would allow you to get at potential causes for changes in population trend. And you'll see an example of that here in a moment when we actually start looking at some of the data. Kind of following the idea of the overlapping consensus, another huge benefit of an IPM is that we're dealing with what we call self-consistent estimates. Those mortality rates, or survival and mortality, reproduction and abundance, they all kind of have to match each other. Otherwise, they have to kind of sync with one another to make the system work. So estimates from different data have to basically be in agreement with one another. IPMs also provide a very flexible structure. So we can use a diversity of data types, and that, in most monitoring programs like ours, we do collect a wide variety of data, and we can take better advantage of those different types of data. It's also, and this is a key advantage of the IPM, is that it accommodates missing or incomplete data series. So this is just an example from a paper, but sometimes you have blocks of information for certain years, but for some reason you cannot collect data in some years. That is not a big deal in IPMs. You can actually accommodate missing or limited data in some years. And so, as an example, last couple of years, because we had to reduce our observation flights, we've not been able to get mark resite estimates. That's not a big deal. We can accommodate for that within this structure. It also allows you to look at, kind of do a cost-benefit analysis. You can look at, well, what value does a particular data set provide to the overall estimate? And if you look at your cost for collecting the data, is that worth it? Does it give you the benefit that you really need to have out of that, or are there other techniques that might be more appropriate in the future? And that's where that flexible structure really comes in. In terms of the development and implementation of this, we've worked closely with partners at the University of Montana through kind of a science consortium there that's called SpeedGoat. Dr. Paul Lukacs and Josh Nowak, they are experts in this field. They basically developed these models, and they're an independent research group. And I think it's important to recognize that an independent research group has been responsible for the development and structure of these models, of course, with our input and with our explaining how our data collections occur. They've been involved in a number of other projects throughout the region. So these are kind of the go-to people for this type of work. And it's been really good collaboration that will continue for some time here. Well, in terms of the structure of the model, we had some big discussions in our study team meeting on how explicit we wanted to be about that. We could just say that a miracle happens and we get an estimate. That would be the easy way out, but I'm going to walk you through the structure of our IPM. And so if you wanted to take a nap for 2 minutes, this is the time to do it. We'll start off with, and what should be gray is white for some reason on these. So this is a gray circle, but keep in mind our central goal here is to estimate the population size and keep track of that over time as a trend. And we do that by invoking what we call a survival module and a reproduction module. And the central feature of an IPM is something called a state space model. Now, don't ask me what that means, because I don't think it's a very intuitive term myself, but that's what it's called. So what it actually does, it links count data with an ecological process, and I think that's hopefully a better way of thinking about it. But it basically, that's why the box here incorporates the survival and the reproduction model. It integrates count data from population monitoring with survival data, with reproduction, etc. So we'll start gradually building the model here. We have data. These are the green squares. We have telemetry observation data. Again, those are really good data sets. And then we have information from our Chow-2 estimates, as we presented before. That's still a useful input to this, an important input, by the way, and also our Mark-III site estimates. We use our telemetry and observation data to then estimate, using what we call a known fate survival model. By monitoring these animals through telemetry, we estimate different survival parameters. So blue is males, and I don't know, what color is that to you? It should be salmon, but it's kind of greenish. So greenish salmon is females. So we have adult group and subadults here. We're estimating that. Then we're using the same telemetry and observation data, combine kind of jointly estimating reproductive parameters like litter size and how many cubs are born. That's this block is how many cubs are born, litter size. Combine it with survival of cubs and yearlings. This number, the number of cubs born, is informed by, and you see it start to get more complex, is informed by the number of females with cubs that, guess what, comes from our estimates from the Chow-2. Because we know what proportion of females with cubs make up of the entire adult female population, we can then estimate the number of females, adult females in the population. Once we have that information, we can also, combined with survival rates, estimate all the other segments of the population. So this is adult males, adult females, subadult males, subadult females, yearlings, cubs. They add up to a total population size at the center. That's how we get there. So it's a complex structure, but all this happens basically at the same time. And there's also a key element of this is that there is a time component to this. So this is done for a single year, and then the next year, the information from this year informs what's going to happen next year, of course. And so that is all integrated into the estimation process. I do want to point out that a lot of the basis behind this is derived from previous work. So I just put some of our publications on there that we put out over the years. As you can see, there's a substantial body of work behind this that we are now, for the first time really, can fully integrate into a single monitoring approach. So let's look at some of the results of running these IPMs so far. So keep in mind, these are still preliminary results. Nothing final about these yet. One thing I should point out is that these IPMs run in a different statistical framework than what most of us are used to. It's called a Bayesian framework, and in Bayesian statistics, we're not dealing with confidence intervals that are called credible intervals. And what that's really getting at, in principle, it's pretty much the same as a confidence interval. It's just a slightly different interpretation, but it's basically a distribution of possible values of a parameter. That does not mean that all values are equally likely. And that's one thing I wanted to point out here. When you look at some of the confidence or the credible intervals that you'll see in the next slides, keep in mind that there is always a tendency for data to be in the peak of a bell curve, so to speak. So it's much more likely, even if you have a large confidence interval, it's much more likely that your actual data are closer to the central point than to the outliers. So let's look at cub survival first. You'll see that this varies quite a bit over time. That is not atypical. That's in fact very typical of bear populations. Cub and yearling survival tends to vary quite a bit, but there's no huge trend in that, even though, as you'll see later, the cub survival has decreased a little bit. Yearling survival is just a little bit higher than cub survival, but it shows the same pattern, basically with a 1-year time lag, which makes sense. Yearlings are 1 year older than cubs, so we see the same pattern. But then as soon as you hit subadults, so as soon as they hit 2 years of age, you see, first of all, that the survival increases at a higher level, but they're also very consistent. And then when you move into the adult stage, 4+ years, that pattern is even more evident. What is kind of interesting here is that males are almost equal to females in this population, which for most bear populations, that's kind of unusual, and it probably reflects the level of protections that are in place, that even males can have such a high survival rate. In terms of reproduction parameters, this is a good one to look at, proportion of females with cubs, and so the proportion of those among the adult female population, you see that's been a very consistent number, so no major changes there at all. We put all these together in a table for 2 different time periods, and we kind of chose, you can pick any time period, but we kind of chose this period because we know in the early 2000s the population growth started slowing down a little bit. We had documented that before, and we wanted to verify, would we document that as well within an IPM approach. And if you look at these numbers, what will you notice? I think you'll notice that almost all of them are the same, with a few exceptions, right? And that's cub and yearling survival. You see a slight decline from 83 to 2001 towards the last 2 decades. So there's a little bit of a decline there. And that's actually enough to cause somewhat of a decline in the annual growth percentage of the population. So we still have 1.4% annual growth of the population. It's still positive growth. And keep in mind, a lower percentage growth on a larger population still adds a bunch of animals to the population. So annually, right now, we estimate roughly, I think about 220 cubs are being born every year. That's a lot of animals that are added to the population every year. So this is the population trend since 1983. Think about 4 decades of data. It's a pretty incredible data set. There's not a lot of wildlife studies that can have such consistent effort over such a long time period. The end point of this is the estimate based on IPM would be 1,055. Remember that number that I presented to you earlier, 1,069 from the Chow-2, very close. Now, Chow-2 is an input to this, so that shouldn't surprise us too much, and it's an important input. But it is good to know that this number jives with all the other estimates of vital rates that were calculated, and that is a really important point to recognize. In terms of understanding what's going on with the population, this is something that we haven't really been able to do in the past. And if you look at the sex ratio, 1-to-1 means there's equal number of females and males in the population. So early on in the 80s, we had quite a bit more females in the population than males. That number, because of high male survival, has changed, and now it's 94 males for every 100 females in the population. So that's getting closer and closer to that 1-to-1 ratio. Part of that reflects high densities in portions of the ecosystem. And so when you look at the lower cub and yearling survival, and we've done this in the past. We published a paper in 2016 that looked at density-dependent effects, so bear density effects, in areas where bear densities are higher, and especially with higher male survival now, cub and yearling survival is lower. They're just more vulnerable to mortality. It's a self-regulating part of the population. And as a biologist, that means to me that we have reached biological recovery within this ecosystem. We've certainly mentioned that before, but we've documented that before, but the IPM corroborates that finding. So to summarize, last couple of slides here, summarize the benefits of the IPM application to the GYE population. First of all, we have a model that was developed independently by University of Montana folks. This system would, for the first time, take full advantage of all IGBC data collections. Previous work corroborates these results. In the future, we envision a system where we could do this with like a 15-year moving window. We would report on many of these parameters on an annual basis, but with a 15-year moving window, not necessarily the entire 40 years, because the last 15 years are probably most informative. We have a flexible implementation, so we can add different things like camera sampling in the future and drop something else like Mark Reeside. One important point that I haven't talked about yet is that Cecily Costello with the NCDE is doing this on their end as well, and it's in the same system. It's a very similar structure with some different data sets. Ultimately, if that works out, these data sets can talk to each other, so to speak, within the same system. And there might even be a potential to add the cabinet jack in the future as well. So we could really start moving towards a multi-ecosystem monitoring approach that is relatively consistent across the entire system. So there's a lot of potential benefits to that. And then it gives us tools, as I mentioned before, to look at cost-benefit analysis, but also to examine different management scenarios in the future, or different scenarios of mortality rates. What if mortality rates increased or lower in the future? What would be the consequences for population size? How soon would population size change? Can we detect those changes, etc.? Those are a lot of valuable things that we could start looking at. So in terms of the final steps, this is kind of more or less a final report on our assessment of where we are with the current development. We are working on preparing an executive summary for the committee. I envision something like similar to what we did with the executive summary on the Chow 2 report. So something like 4 pages, just so that you have something that kind of gives an overview of what we're presenting here and for you to review. I think there will be some additional development necessary, especially in terms of developing some projection tools which are not quite ready yet within the model, and to be able to do some simulations. I think it's also very important that, and the entire study team agrees, that we prepare a publication for a peer-reviewed journal to make sure that has gone through a peer review. And at that point, so that will all occur within the next year, and then we hope by next spring we can kind of present this committee with some potential management scenarios, and see if the IPM could serve as a tool to establish a different set of population criteria, for example. And that's just something for this committee to consider in the future. So with that, I'd like to acknowledge our partners with University of Montana and Speedgoat, Paul Lukacs, Josh Nowick, and Hans Martin, and of course our IGBC members and agencies. And then finally, I wanted to do a big shout out, like everyone else, to Kevin Fry and Dan Bjornley. I think it's a little hard to see, but that's the arrow points at Kevin Fry. I think he's sitting next to Mark Harrelson there, one of the earlier captures. These, I don't know, they have some similar characteristics, and one thing that stands out to me is what I would call kind of a quiet wisdom. Very unassuming people that make huge contributions to this, have made huge contributions to the study team. 50 plus years of experience, that's hard to beat. And their kind of no-nonsense and common sense approach has helped us stay grounded as a study team. And I think that's been incredibly valuable. Dan, best of luck to you and your family in Alaska, and we're going to miss you. Thanks. Any questions?
So Frank, I got a question for you, if I can say it correctly. So you said that you could potentially use IPM with both the NCDE and the GYE, which is a big advantage. What about when you go to a smaller population like the Cabinet Yaak or something like that? Can you still use IPM there on its own, or do you have to have these populations with basically these areas that have a larger bear population feeding into the model then?
Yeah, that's a good question. The population size is not necessarily that much of a consideration there. It's more the type of data collections. And so obviously, Wayne and his crew in Cabinet Yaak are collecting slightly different data than we are, but the NCD is also collecting slightly different data than we are. That is actually something that can be accommodated within this framework. In the Cabinet Yaak instance, it might be a little more challenging because of the data collections are just a little bit different from what we and NCDE have. I think our data are more similar to the NCDE than they are to the Cabinet Yaak. So that could present a little bit of a challenge, but I think it's certainly worth exploring. And keep in mind too that even if they are lacking some data, that in this whole estimation process, they can borrow data from the other ecosystems. Because if you look at the NCDE values and you compare them, for example, for survival, and you compare them to ours, it is amazing how similar they are. These two populations, they're almost basically at the same level in terms of abundance. They're showing very, very similar dynamics. So that's really cool, I think. But that also provides value to maybe use some of that information to help inform the estimation process for a place like Cabinet Yaak. Long answer, but that's yes. The short answer is
I know it wasn't going to be simple answer. So
yeah, you're talking to a scientist.
Yeah. Also, one other question. Well, I just wanted to make sure I saw it correctly. Was because this might enter into some of our discussion here in a little bit about the conservation strategy and timing of signing and so forth. So you're thinking that for IPM, we're probably at least a year away from implementing that for a main way we would estimate populations in the GYE.
I think that's an accurate assessment. In fact, we had some discussion about that at our study team meeting that we just had over the last couple of days. And I initially thought that maybe we could start implementation this year and this fall, but I think there was a general agreement that we still have a little bit of homework to do and some additional development in terms of looking at the development of some projection tools. And that we haven't been able to do that because that part of the model development isn't done yet. So that's kind of what we're waiting for.
Okay, thanks.
And really, there's no rush with implementation. I think that it's not like the estimates are going to drastically change. They're going to be very similar to what we're providing currently with the Chow 2 estimator. So.
Okay, thanks. I think I'm going to flip-flop the next two agenda items, and I'm going to have Danielle give a short update on I&E stuff, and then we'll get into a couple of discussions after that.
Okay, so first off, I just want to say thanks to the folks who already reported on their IE&O work. It's great to actually hear it coming from the folks that are out there in the field doing that, so I'll spend less time talking about each state's IE&O, but make a little mention of Montana's. I'm just coming from my position at Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. And I know I introduced myself earlier, I should say it again. So my name's Danielle Euler. I'm the Wildlife Stewardship Outreach Specialist for Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and I work statewide in Montana. So I'm based in the GYE, but I serve the whole state. So today I'm just going to talk a little bit about what the IE&O subcommittee has been doing, a little bit about our funding, talk about outreach that we've done, and then talk about the Bear Smart Community Program to kind of transmit some of the information about oops, that got loud. The information, microphone's not happy, okay. The information from the executive IE&O committee down to this committee so you guys know what's going on there. So that's my goal here today. First, want to thank our IE&O subcommittee members. So these are the folks that are on the Yellowstone Ecosystems Information Education and Outreach Subcommittee. I know it's just a lot of acronyms. If you're not familiar with it, I want to make sure it's clear what we're doing. So our ecosystem subcommittee members, we review the funding proposals that we get for the IGBC Information Education and Outreach funding every year. We rate these proposals as a group, and then we send those recommendations to the executive level. So there's another IE&O group at the executive level, and then they look at all the proposals from all the different ecosystems and decide who gets the funding. And then I share that information back here to you guys. So in 2022, just a little background on the numbers here. So there was about $44,000 available for all 5 ecosystems for IE&O. And in the GYE, we reviewed 8 proposals this year. And in all the ecosystems total, there were 19 proposals. And the total requested funding, if everybody got everything they wanted, was about $89,000. So we ended up being that the executive committee, IE&O committee, picked 3 of our proposals. So 2 of them are under kind of the same name, but they're 2 separate proposals, bridging the gap. So this is work for signage, education, and outreach in the area between the NCDE and the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And 1 awardee was the Helena Lewis and Clark National Forest, and 1 was the Montana Discovery Foundation. And this is one that, if you've been to these meetings before, you've seen this this program before. And then the other awardee was the Jackson Ranger District Bear Food Storage Science and Safety Science here on the Bridger Teton. And if you don't see your proposal up here, and then it wasn't awarded this year, and I'm happy to explain or talk to you guys about how we pick what we do, and just know that even if we recommend proposals, they go up against everybody else's at the end. So some of it is in this level and some of it is not. In 2023, we'll also have probably about that $45,000 or $44,000 again. There's a minimum proposal level of $2,500, and there's a lot of details on our website about how to apply for these proposals. So just so you guys know, that'll be in October that we put that request for proposals out, and we'll go through the same process again next year. Does anyone have any questions on the IE&O funding program? Okay. All right. Outreach updates. It was great to hear what everybody else had to say, and it just reminds me just how everyone is connected. I appreciated what Dan was saying about how all of this work, research and management, and IE, all support grizzly bear recovery. Montana did a lot of the very similar work to what Idaho and Wyoming did this year, and so I don't want to belabor that too much. We've been doing a lot of bear outreach over many, many years in our state. We reached it from the folks that I keep track of, which are our Forest Service bear technicians on the Custer Gallatin and Beaverhead Deer Lodge National Forest, as well as myself and several other colleagues at Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. Just that little group reached over 13,000 people last year at events, on patrols for our bear technicians, and at presentations on bear safety and trainings. So just one of the many things we're all doing. And then I just wanted to add on a few things about just programs that we're working on and videos. We're trying to fill in the gaps where there's informational videos that don't exist. So we're not going to tackle a hunting in bear country video because, for example, Wyoming Outfitter and Guide Association did such a great job with their hunting video. So we're not going to recreate the wheel there. We did one this year on hunting birds in bear country because that's a unique situation we have on the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem out on the prairie and in other parts of Montana. We're also working on a bear spray video, did one on hyperphagia, all kinds of new ways for people to learn about bears and learn how to be safe in bear country. And then just also, Jeremy had mentioned the rental sign that he created, which gave me the idea to do the same thing, so we'll have one for Montana too. So awesome to have this group of people to transmit ideas and share what works and what doesn't. Any questions so far? I don't want to skip too far ahead, but if not, I'm going to start on the Bear Smart Community Program, which is really exciting. So this is just an update on what's going on with the IGBC's Bear Smart Community Program. This is an outline of the 4 main steps that will be needed for communities to become Bear Smart. Now, I want to be really clear on this. This is not IGBC asking people to be Bear Smart. What we're doing is creating a framework for communities to pick up and use to understand how they can be Bear Smart, and you give them resources and information and provide, just again, that framework to become Bear Smart. So where we're at right now is we hired a contractor to put together a manual for these communities to use, and so she has created the first draft of this manual. We have a working group on this Bear Smart Community Program, and again, this is not to replace any other Bear Smart or Bearwise or any of the programs that are already going on for information education. This is just to be in support of the already existing programs and in support of the communities that are desiring the goal. So the way that this program is supposed to work is that the community will first establish a Bear Smart committee, which is the formation of a committee that has experts and people who want to engage in this program for their community. They will complete a Bear Smart community assessment. So this is to understand what's going on in their community, what the kinds of bear conflicts are they have, and what they can do to work towards that, towards mitigating those with the people that, depending on where they live, the people that are experts in their area, hopefully will be engaged in this process. Then they will develop a Bear Smart community plan, which would create a guiding document for that community's efforts. And then they would review the community plan with an advisor, possibly from IGBC. This is just this is like the draft right now. So again, this may not be exactly how it looks in July when it's presented to the executive committee, but this is where it's at right now, so preliminary. And then the community would implement that Bear Smart community plan. So the community assessment, just to give you an idea of the depth of what this framework is giving people to think about their bear issues, because a lot of people really are interested. They don't know where to even begin because this is such a complicated and all-encompassing project to get your community Bear Smart. They have to do a community, understand their communities as who they are and kind of describe their community, understand the bear population, habitat and wildlife corridors, history of human-bear interactions, attractants, education and outreach, solid waste management, community development, enforcement, meaning bylaws, state and federal laws, and then understanding the community safety and attitudes. So these are all just some components of that program. And so this will be, like I said, July is when the final product will be presented to our executive committee. So I hope that was clear. I've been in this working group, and so a lot of this is familiar, and if you have any questions or anything seems fuzzy, please ask, and between me and David, we'll probably be able to answer. Yeah. And Jennifer, oh yeah. Jennifer, and there's a couple other people on this working group in this room. Do you raise your hand if you're on this working group? Okay. So Kyle and Jeremy, and these guys. Jennifer, thanks. Any questions? And anything you wanted to add, David, that I didn't mention about this, or Jennifer?
This is on, okay. All I'll add is that it's still in development. We really are trying to make it so that communities can buy into it really easily. It's not a lot of effort on their part. I mean, the assessment is relatively labor intensive, but beyond that, we really want to make it easy for communities to get Bear Smart certified so that they can follow these guidelines, and then they actually have a certification that they could use either in marketing proposals or tourism or whatever they wanted to, that they are actually a Bear Smart community. We're also trying to target this not just in localized towns, but maybe unincorporated counties, if they would want to do it. And we also want to emphasize, as Danielle did, that this isn't supplanting what all the great work that's been done, especially in this community and with Wyoming Game and Fish and Bearwise. It really is focusing on those outlying communities and counties across all of the other states that maybe haven't have an advanced program that you all have here. I think we're really just wanting to provide this for them and really trying to allow people to understand how they can coexist with grizzly bears in their community. Thanks.
Anyone else? Questions or additions to this? All right. Well, that's all I have. So thank you guys.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit. We've been spending most of the morning listening to other folks talk, and I think there's a few things that would be good for us to talk about. Looking at kind of the presentations we've had, just different things going on, some of the work we've done, some of the work we've completed. So I just thought it'd be beneficial to have a little discussion on where we go from here related to changes in the conservation strategy, and particularly to timing of signing for that. Because there's a bunch of stuff going on right now, so we voted on the developed site, language changes. So we've got that, and I know Forest Service is eager to start implementation on that. BLM's starting to move more towards getting theirs done. So there's things going on with that. We changed how we're estimating populations a little bit. We've got improved Chow 2. We're potentially getting to maybe next spring where we might start using IPM. And there's discussions going around about maybe more of a commitment related to relocations of bears related to genetic diversity. And so we got kind of all that going on. And, but for our group, if we do change things, like do the developed sites language change that we voted on. So the conservation strategy was signed. A lot of the folks that sign it are not sitting at this table. I know for me, my director is the one that signs it. And so we have to get the document to them. And so I was thinking, okay, as we go through some of these language changes in the conservation strategy, do we want to each time, like let's say they're all going to happen in the next year, do we want to each time have it signed by these folks? Is there a good time that makes sense to wait for some signing for at least one more to get done? I don't have a really good solution for all that, but I thought we probably needed to talk about it. Because it's really not totally changed in the strategy until it gets signed. And so I just thought I'd throw it out there and kind of, what do folks want to do? And we heard Wyoming asked let's move on to kind of getting some of these things done in the strategy. So I'm just throwing it out there. What do you all think?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I'll kick this off a little bit. I think the timing right now for the conservation strategy to be updated and sent for new signatures is appropriate. I think the work that's been done on Chapter 3 and the vote yesterday, along with our desire, I would like to ask this YES subcommittee to direct the study team to update Chapter 2 and Appendix C with the revised Chow 2 estimates. I think the study team, based on their hard work, could get that done fairly quickly. And so I think the timing of revisions to Chapter 3, revised Chapter 2 and Appendix C, and get that done swiftly and get that back out for signatures would be appropriate right now. So.
Since I'm close to the mic, I was just going to would echo that completely. I know, Jim, when I spoke to you last night, I was thinking, well, maybe since we know that there's other things that are going to happen over the year, do we go through that signature process, or do we basically say that once we've taken a vote as yes, we can begin to implement? And the more I thought about it, then I thought about what's potentially coming next spring. And sometimes timeframes go longer than we think they will. I think about that with developed sites. We were going to be done in 2018, and it's 2022. So when I take all that together with what you just offered, I think it would make more sense to update it and just acknowledge that by keeping it updated and signed by the execs that sign it, that really is our way of articulating what's the current conservation strategy versus it being in yes notes somewhere or somewhere through a vote. So I would just advocate for updating it with the developed site stuff and the Chapter 2 information.
Tricia.
So maybe the only other thing I would throw in the room, and a couple folks brought this up during the break, David Diamond being one of them, that sort of if you recall this, and I'm not opposed to that, I think if we could get through the edits to Chapter 2 quickly, I would be supportive of that. And I don't think the signing's a big, if we're just signing an amendment, it doesn't have to be a big to-do, we just get it signed. But kind of going back to at least the habitat chapter, if you think about it, we already committed to changing it in the signed conservation strategy. So I think it brings up a good point of, do we really need to re-sign it since we already signed that we were going to do this? So And at least I heard this, I want to verify this, but it sounds like one of our sister ecosystems has done amendments iteratively maybe and not signed it. And Hillary's nodding her head, so I'm like, if somebody actually can verify that, I'm just curious. So, like, is that something we could consider as we do these? And I think it's a great question about incremental changes and when does it trigger a signature change. So, just another thought. But I guess I'd go back to if we could do that piece quickly and get this, signed relatively. I don't know what a time frame is, but that makes sense to me. And then we know there's other potential changes that are going to be coming on board, but I wouldn't want to wait, since we know that might take longer.
Yeah, and again, I don't know if this is the right format, but I was thinking the last big signing in 2016, we did that at the IGBC meeting, and again, I don't know if the timeframes are at all doable, but there is the July IGBC meeting, and then of course the December IGBC meeting. So you tend to have a lot of the execs together.
Yeah, I guess I don't know for sure on what you were talking about related to how much change can you make before you have to sign? Can you do amendments? I'm not really sure. I've looked in our bylaws about this sort of thing, and in fact, I think I printed them off and have them, but it's not real clear. Yeah.
I was actually just looking. Hillary, do you have any, from your perspective, is there any advantage to kind of having that architecture of something updated, or does it really matter?
For the Fish and Wildlife Service, I think it really matters if we're considering imminently delisting. But I was trying to think, for the NCDE subcommittee, they agreed to do minor edits, just, they can do that. If there's anything above a minor edit, they bring it to the subcommittee. So far, I believe it's just been by vote. There hasn't been anything super substantial that has required the subcommittee to sign another time. However, I think there are a couple agencies, like we were trying to get the BIA to sign, and they have not signed it yet. So there was a couple, wasn't fully signed to begin with. And like I said, for the services perspective, it's really a post-delisting monitoring document, so it's not a crisis yet.
So Frank, I have to give Frank a mic for this one. So Frank, if we wanted to figure out the language change that had to occur related to improved Chow 2, is that would that take a lot of work? What is that? Is there much? I mean, I've read it. I went back and read it just a couple of days ago to look at it, but I'm not. Is that could we have that in a month or 2 months or 6 months, or what would? And are you the ones that I'm assuming you know the most about it? Does it make sense to have you or your team do that? What's your thoughts on it?
Yeah, good. It definitely makes sense for us to work on that as a team and make those changes. In terms of the time frame, I'm kind of looking at Dan, but I think we're all in agreement that wouldn't take terribly long, and so that's something that we should be able to produce by summer. I can't promise a month. That's a little too much, but by summer I think we should be able to do that. And frankly, those are change enough to make sure that that is updated in the conservation strategy now that we have started implementing that.
Okay, yeah.
So I am wondering, going back to, does it make sense that we commit to try to get this ready for the summer IGBC meeting to get signed? Like, could we do that, or are you talking like end of summer? Because when's that meeting? July.
So basically, you'd have to get the language changed. It doesn't sound like it's too terribly difficult.
No.
You'd have to, we'd want to get it out to this group for, okay, that sounds good. Or we do a phone call, with this group, and it's basically, what do you think? And we get like a head nod or a vote on the phone in June, and then you're probably ready to go for those 2 items.
Hey, Jim?
You folks think that's doable? Hillary's like going like this, so.
Jennifer just reminded me, we said that if we were going to make changes, it should go out for public comment, which we did for the habitat standards. But if we're going to change for table 2, and then maybe change again in the future with the translocation, that's worth considering. So we would need to go out for public comment for each of those changes, or do we hold it and public comment once?
That's a good point.
Clarifying question then. The changes to Chow 2 have already been, they've run through this group already, because the genetic augmentation write-up really hasn't yet.
Yeah, so tell me if I'm wrong here, Frank, but the changes, the improved Chow 2 has been well explained and to this group and so forth, but it wasn't necessarily something, it's just better science. And so it wasn't necessarily something that the subcommittee said had to actually do a hard vote on, and it's kind of how I recall it.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment. Yeah, we basically, as a study team, we made the decision that we need to move towards a system with improved estimation, higher accuracy of the estimates. That's what we implemented. That's a scientific issue, scientific decision, and that's I see that as an implementation and improvement, enhancement of the technique on our end, and we just need to make sure that that's properly documented. And so, by the way, I haven't mentioned this, but we did submit a paper to a journal for peer review. We're still waiting for the reviews on that, on the Chow 2 enhancement. So that could be important in this effort, but I don't know that the changes to Chapter 2 would be dependent on that necessarily, but wouldn't hurt if that was done.
So then my follow-up question is, for the genetic augmentation write-ups that a lot of folks in the room and others have at least seen and maybe commented on, is there direction or request by this group for that team to continue to work towards a document that is ready for some sort of review or consideration? So the document I referenced yesterday and a few other folks have, right, is kind of its rationale and process for if a bear was to be moved from the NCD into the Yellowstone for genetic augmentation. So it's been seen by a lot of people in the room, but I'm not so sure a lot of people around the table, right? So I'm asking, is there direction to the primary authors, which are Montana staff, to continue to work on it, maybe get it cleaned up to a point at which the group around the table takes a look at it? I don't know what the history of it is. Maybe Frank or somebody else can help me.
I'm just trying to think about this a little bit. It wasn't necessarily direction from the Yes Subcommittee to put that together. So I guess, I don't know, what do you folks think? Go ahead, Toby.
Thank you, Jim. So genetic augmentation has already been dealt with in the MOA between the 3 states. So I appreciate the work that Rich is doing, but I don't think it actually has to be signed off by the 3 states to move forward with genetic augmentation. So that's sort of a Montana document, as far as I know. And Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho have already signed off on how we're going to move forward with genetic augmentation in the MOA. So I think we got that covered.
So Hillary's asking if you do that, if there's language in the conservation strategy related to it, how you incorporate that into it.
I just think we put reference to the MOA in the conservation strategy and leave it at that. Because really, as Hillary said, it's about post-delisting, which puts a responsibility on the states to do that, which the MOA covers all of those actions. So I think we're covered.
Mary, I know you got a question. I can see it on you.
And hello. Sorry, maybe it's just trying to understand the parts and pieces and what really is a change to the conservation strategy, because that's in the charter of Yes, or YGCC, and then Yes. That speaks to the role of the subcommittee in voting on changes to the conservation strategy, right? We have a fundamental role, but my recollection, you've read it more recently, is it doesn't really get into the micro detail of, like, do we really minor changes to the conservation strategy or things that are added in that aren't, fundamentally within the framework of Yes, do we bring those to the vote? So that's why I was looking a little bit perplexed. Developed sites, for me, was clearly a change to the conservation strategy and how we dealt with that. And we've brought it to this committee all along. The agreements amongst the state or some of the genetic augmentation, I think, would be of interest to the committee to be informed about, but it doesn't seem as if it's a decision that comes to Yes for a vote. But I'm saying that through a little bit of ignorance, because I don't really know what under our charter comes to the committee for a vote and what doesn't. And then that kind of relates to the Chow 2 estimator and the fact that, to me, that just seems like the evolution of good scientific information that we use. And so updating the conservation strategy to kind of reflect that evolution makes sense. It doesn't seem like a voting thing. Right? I mean, would we vote to say, let's let science evolve? Anyway, so I'm just struggling with that nuance of what really comes to a vote, because I felt like we had some substantive things, different than NCD, not edits and stuff, but they're substantive. And I was just pitching, if we've got substantive things that we've moved to a conclusion, let's update it and let's get it signed so that we have that legacy document. But that's only to say I don't really know where this other fits. It doesn't feel like it comes to Yes for a vote. But I think there would be public interest and committee interest in having the conversation about genetic augmentation and where the states see that going, just because it's of interest to the shared work we have. But again, not in the context of a vote. Hopefully that wasn't too long, but that's what I'm struggling with.
No, I think I think those are really good points, and I think that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. Right now, I think it's pretty doable to, we have the language change for developed sites. There's language already in the conservation strategy related to using best science. I mean, there's specific wording in there related to the actual Chow 2, but folks have already voted on, yes, you need to use best science type of thing. So I'm trying to work that through in my mind. It seems to me something that's doable in not that long a time period is to have the wording in the conservation strategy put in there that we voted on yesterday, change the wording on Chow 2. I don't know that we necessarily have to have a yes vote on that particular item, but I think timing-wise we could with a phone call if we need it, if folks think we do. And then you could have a signing in July. I think that's, time-wise, I think it's accomplishable. I think folks just have to be a little on task, and the chair can help that happen. But I think when you start throwing all these other things in it, I think it just gets kind of convoluted, and I think those two are achievable by July. And that's just my thoughts.
There you go. Yeah, Jim, I just totally agree with your thoughts. I think you're right on track with the direction we should go. So thank you.
Tricia.
So sort of one technical question, and we can resolve this later, but there really isn't a person that keeps the conservation strategy. And so I think as we're merging I'm just saying this from what I dealt with already, and I'm trying to not make somebody else have to deal with this. We're gonna have two different people working on so we need a common, so I don't know if it's the chair, if you want to take that on, but we need a common keeper of it that's going to actually make sure the edits are, done, legible. So again, it's just technical stuff, but we really don't have that laid out.
No, that's a good point.
So,
I think the chair can help with that. Yeah. I think that, so we already have the language that we voted on.
We do.
So that's just done, right?
Yeah.
So
there's a couple things we agreed to add, so we got to fix that, but it's almost done.
Close to done.
Close to done.
So basically, my thought would be you get just a few folks involved with this. You get the chair involved with it to kind of keep it rolling and make sure there's not several copies of this going around. So the chair helps with that. We get one person from your developed sites group. We get Frank or a person that he gives to us from the science team, and we knock it out. And we can share that with the yes folks. I think we could probably share that we'll just say let's try to do that in early June so that yes folks can look at it and we can get it back and maybe I think we'd have to have it totally ready with thoughts from everyone in this subcommittee by the end of June. But I don't think it's that complicated. So would that be a good group to do that, or do folks want another person or two involved? What do you think? I'm thinking the more people you get in on this, the more discussions you have to have, the longer it takes. And Lisa.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question about the public comment period. We're not doing that for the Chapter 3 changes, because we already did it. But what about the Chow 2?
The feeling that I got from folks when that came up was that in the conservation strategy, we've already said we use best science.
Okay.
And that we can incorporate that. I could be wrong, But if I am, just say so if somebody has a different opinion, but I kind of thought folks were thinking that.
Thanks, Jim. I agree. I just wanted that clarification.
That we use
Appreciate
best
it.
science, and as we move through there, we can just incorporate those changes.
Thanks.
Okay? All right. We'll do that. So, Tricia, just let me know who the person is from your team, and Frank can tell you. I thought you were like moving on, like. Okay. So, great. Got it. Thank you. Oh, you are right here. Wow. I was going to like, James. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about work plans. We're kind of getting close to wrapping up here. But one of the things in the last year, and one of the things that David is interested in, is IGBC kind of wants to help the different subcommittees be a little more involved maybe with our work plans. And I think that what I heard from the different subcommittees when we were talking to IGBC about this, I don't know, maybe 6 months or a year ago, when the subcommittee chairs were talking to them, is there was also an interest from the subcommittees for IGBC to be a little more involved. So it was more connected. And we weren't just going back every year saying, this is what we're going to do, this is what we did, and there's no real connection to the overall goals that maybe IGBC has. So that's kind of where we're getting here, is that this is just kind of moving into that a little bit. David talking a little bit about, hey, what are you doing? What are you going to do next? And I don't know that we have to have any hard decisions, but it's a good discussion to have.
Thanks, Jim. And we obviously are constrained on time. I want to, congratulate. Sure. I want to congratulate the YES committee. I mean, the conservation strategy is a crowning achievement. It's an incredibly impressive piece of work, and the two changes that were just discussed were foreseen at the time of the document's creation. The idea that the best science might be updated, the idea that the federal land managers were going to codify a system for keeping track of no net loss of secure habitat. So those are really important accomplishments and represent the work of this subcommittee. That has been your work plan for many years, and recognizing that milestone I think is important. So again, thinking about the buckets of work, it actually fits into those, because obviously habitat, that's the chapter 3 goes directly to that. The science portion, you're on the cutting edge here, potentially for even other ecosystems in terms of population estimators. So then you heard earlier this morning all the ongoing work from the state agencies, from other federal managers and tribal managers on information, education, outreach, conflict reduction, and that's ongoing work that has been going on for many years, and there's clearly a commitment to continuing. And so then that fourth category was targeted efforts for conflict reduction, and you have two standing working groups that, as I understand it, are going to be continuing to meet here between now and November. So there was the backcountry and hunting working group and the livestock conflict working group. And I guess my question or my request, because the IGBC executives have asked me to sort of be a conduit of information back and forth, and they're also looking at some of these topics and looking at ways of organizing work around those topics. So interested in where you think those are going, what work might be proposed between now and November, and recognize also that we may not have enough time to get through that right now, but to me, that's, as I listened to you the last day and a half, that's what I heard in terms of what this group has on its agenda, on its plate.
David, I don't want to derail the conversation, but one of
Just say it.
Exercise, running around. Actually, it was one of the reflections I had just personally thinking about the two subgroups that we have working and that we're invested in as yes is I was just asking myself, how much do I really know and understand about the work of those working groups, and from a local level wanting to get more up to speed on those, which David doesn't get to the specifics of what they're going to work on, but I was going to say maybe an ask would be to hold just an hour call with those working groups, or a chance to just have members who want to understand how we could contribute and engage, just to have some updates outside of this meeting, because in this meeting, when we're doing those updates, we really don't have the time to ask like a dumb question or say, tell me a little bit more about where this working group is going. So I think it would be helpful. Well, and Trish, I guess maybe you're backing out on that. You were pleading for someone to step in on the livestock, and I don't know if I was actually trying to introduce my honorable partner to the right into that, but actually. Anyway, I think my bigger ask was we don't really have enough time at these yes meetings to necessarily get into the detail, and one thing that would be really helpful is just to host a call in the next couple months where yes members could jump on the call, really get updated on that working group, and then talk about could we provide a little bit more horsepower to those working groups. And what would be, because each of us represents individual entities who are all invested in that work, and maybe we could add a little bit more capacity to those working groups. So anyway, again, David, that doesn't get you to the specifics, but I think in my mind it kind of helps get to the specifics of who's on those working groups, how do we make sure that those working groups have enough capacity if they have some additional needs. And then like on the livestock one, Tricia, you put out a lot of questions yesterday about really where should that group go and where should they focus. And then this morning when I looked at the conflict reports and the numbers around livestock conflicts, even on private land, it put a point on that working group to me.
Well, I think a phone call doing that it's pretty doable. I mean, basically we can just say that we're going to do a phone call, it's going to be at this time, and it's not like every single person at this table would be probably able to participate, but even if you can't, you probably have a person that works for you that can report back to you on it. So I think it's something we can do if folks want to do that.
Again, I don't know how others felt about it. I just feel like I needed to really understand that work and how to contribute, and then it might contribute to the work plan because it might then flesh out where to.
So David, are you asking us, are we going to work on anything additional, or are you asking us, or are we going to continue? Because I think we've already committed earlier to continuing to work with those two work groups.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, and I think we were pretty clear on what that work was, and I would just go back to the livestock committee. We still have work to do to organize ourselves around what is it we're going to do. So there isn't, the only other thing I would add, David, and maybe I'm flipping the question around, but to me it's sort of like, what can IGBC do in terms of coordinating some of these topics across all of the ecosystems, and particularly this one around livestock conflict. I mean, we're going to be working within our own, and maybe that's a topic that needs some sort of coordination that way. So I think, to me, that would be the only thing I would say is maybe I certainly would support that. I think there could be, there's a lot of work going on across multiple ecosystems that would be really valuable to share in some context. So,
yeah, that is very true. And I'm tracking a lot of that at work. Many other agencies, sister agencies in the United States Department of Agriculture, other nonprofit entities, all kinds of people are doing really good work in that area. And again, Mary, you're right, the Wyoming and the Montana presentations in particular highlighted this as a significant source of conflict ongoing. And so looking for tools, I think, is clearly something we want to work at. And the question always is, at what scale? Is it local? Is it ecosystem-wide? Are some of these tools, maybe state, NRCS, concepts or larger federal ideas? So happy to keep that conversation going. I know it's something that the executives are going to be taking on when they meet in July.
So David, as part of the Backcountry Working Group, I'll work with Katie Stevens. I think it's a wonderful idea, Mary, and we'll get us a call set up and we'll make sure you're invited. And any YES members that want to be invited, just for an update of how we're moving forward with the food storage orders, with the Wyoga training video, as well as the signage.
So do you want to do that like late May, June? What, like a timing of, so are we thinking a call now? Okay. So what do you want the timing of that to be? What's best for you? You've got most of it going on, so what do you think would be best?
I'm pretty booked through the end of May, so it's going to have to be sometime in June. So we'll set that up for mid-June.
Yep, that sounds good.
All right. And we still have Mary DeVersa on the phone, I hope. Do we?
Mary, are you still on the phone?
Because I would like to continue to coordinate with her as the co-chair to make sure she's involved as well.
Okay, sounds good. We'll do it. Good? All right. Okay, so does anybody have any last minute things they want to say before we move into public comment?
Well, Jim, I don't think this needs a microphone. I just think you should do it. Thank you one last time, Jim, for your taking on the leadership of this.
No, thank you. Yeah. Okay, James told me that we do have a few people that signed up to speak their minds.
One?
Go ahead.
Tom.
Thanks. My name is Tom Mengelson, resident of Jackson, and I appreciate everybody having such good presentations today, and I've been at a number of these over the years, and thank you for letting me speak. And I'd like to congratulate all those hard-working people who have really reduced bear conflicts in one way or another, whether it be fencing or picking up apples or putting out new trash cans in the parks or doing all these really great things to reduce conflict. And that's huge, obviously, to help bears, and save people or whatever. I especially appreciated Carrie Gunther's presentation, and I've appreciated Carrie's work for many years in Yellowstone. And when he said that back when, in the olden days, so to speak, I might not quote you totally correct, but I hope I'm trying, because there's just a lot of information here. And there used to be 100 conflicts, not that, well, some years ago. Now there were 4 in Yellowstone and 0 removals. I mean, that's a hell of a big deal to me. That's great. Congratulations. And in Teton Park, I think Justin said there were 4 conflicts and I think 4 euthanized bears. Maybe I think there were maybe 6 or something. I'm not sure, but it's still too many bears in my estimation who were euthanized. But you're on the right track in many ways, and I want to thank you for that. I'd also like to thank Mike Boyce, who did such a yeoman's job last year, protecting 399 over and above normal human beings' ability in a way. I know he was out there midnight some days and out there at 5 o'clock other days trying to keep track of her, which isn't all that easy. I've been documenting her for almost 16 years now. I did a book about her, and I've spent more than 140 days last year looking for bears, either her or another bears. So I know what it takes. I've been out there 11 days now straight, and I haven't seen a bear yet. And that's all day. So it's a lot of work. And thank you, Mike. It seems that most of the conflicts, if I got this right, are on public lands and with the livestock community. It seems that I know a lot of these are public lands or leased lands for cattle and sheep, and they are really public lands. And I think that the ranchers need to accept more losses at the price they pay for sheep and for cattle grazing on public lands, and that's always been a sore point for me, but maybe the livestock community could do more in protecting bears. We have too many bears killed by depredation on cows or sheep. And Frank Van Anen, I always like coming to listen to you. I've been in over 20 some years. And most of the time I can't follow. I'm sorry, I had a hard time getting through calculus and things like that. And but I know if you keep working at it, we're going to get back to 50,000 bears in the lower 48 like they would prehistory. So keep working on those numbers. That would be wonderful. I know we went from 760 bears a year ago to, I think you said, 1,069 by the new counting methods. And I asked Dr. Dave Mattson, who, as you know, used to be on the IGBC team. He's now retired. And I respect him a lot, not only for his work on cougars, but on grizzly bears, his science and his ability to suss out numbers and statistics and things. And he said, basically, I'm not quoting him, but what I had written down last week or so was, he suggests that the increase in the population numbers is mostly due to the new methods of counting, which we've argued back and forth for 10 years now about having one observer in a plane, 2 planes with 4 observers, 3 planes, different methods. Every 5 years come up with different methods. Counting, we end up with more bears, but it all kind of comes back to nobody actually knows how many bears. I don't think, but that's my opinion. Somewhere between 700, 600, maybe 1,000, maybe 1,200. But what Dave Mattson says is that the reality is, he's looked at all the statistics, that in the past 14 or more years, whatever number it is, the trend is either flat or going down. And he says, with the number of bears that we have killed the last year, some 60 in the Greater Yellowstone area, and some 33 or 37 in Wyoming, that's a hell of a lot. That's more bears than we've ever lost. And he said it's basically unsustainable. It might not catch up with us. It's not going to be immediately, as Frank, you know, everybody knows. That might not catch up for a few years, but when it does, it might be a serious downturn. That will be something maybe you should all you take into also the fact that we all know that there's probably some big number of bears that are killed, shoot, shovel, and shut up. That maybe twice as many as what we have on paper. So that adds to the other problem. I think I'm here, and I think all of you are here for protection of bears one way or another, hopefully, and I know there's some may not be so keen on that. But I think the real elephant in the room is the delisting of grizzly bears. And we want to get the numbers up. We want to get them up, whatever it is. And we're going to transplant them and do genetic, move them around. They're busting at the seams. They're in places they haven't been. Again, Dave Mattson, of course, somebody who I think knows more than I do, is this because food. They're looking for food. Females are losing whitebark pine. Well, we talked about cutthroat trout. And of course they're expanding. 399 went way down south, probably looking for berries last year, and then found there's an early hunting season south of town for deer and elk. She can smell a long ways. Got down there, lots of berries, found some carcasses. And sure enough, she came back, went back to the same den. Same area anyway, I'm quite sure it's the same den that she's been going to. But the elephant in the room really is to delist grizzly bears and then turn over the management to the states of Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. We did that with wolves recently, and they've massacred wolves. I mean, the atrocities with wolves, pretty damn akin to Ukraine. Nothing's akin to Ukraine, what's happening, nothing. Horrific. But running over wolves with snow machines, numerous times to kill them for fun, is barbaric. The governor of Montana trapped a wolf, as many of you maybe read, let it be in a trap for a number of days, and then he shot it. And this was a research animal. It was a wolf out of Yellowstone Park that had a lot of years of research on it. And the governor hated wolves so much that he trapped it, left it in a trap, and then shot it, a research animal. He and the governor of Wyoming and Idaho all have banded together to propose delisting grizzly bears and turning over the management to the states. If that's the kind of management states do to wolves, why the hell would we ever want to turn over the management of grizzly bears to the states? That is a really crappy record they have. Lastly, I saw on the front page of the news last week, Game and Fish proposes to sell lottery tickets for the Grand Slam. Mountain goats, bighorn sheep. I looked down, of course, there's a grizzly bear. They said, well, there's an exception. If you do win the lottery, you'll have to wait to shoot the grizzly bear because they're an endangered species. But you could apply for it. That's where the Game and Fish's head's at. I'm sorry. You tell me one hand, you want to protect them, you do all this stuff to help save them, protect them, conflict management. If you advertise to raise money for the Game and Fish, you want to have a grand slam, kill a grizzly bear. You don't have the big five in Africa, everybody wanted. 4 of those species, black rhino, lion, leopard, elephant, whatever, there's 4 of them that are now endangered. Is that what we're going to do our grizzly bears? Lastly, my whole thing has always been, why do we want to kill a sentient, intelligent, emotional being for fun? I asked Dan Thompson a couple of years ago at a cougar meeting in Center for the Arts. There's a panel, and I just asked him. I started the Cougar Fund 20 years ago now with a friend of mine. So I've been down this road with cougars as long as bears, longer. And I asked him, why are we killing cougars? There's absolutely no scientific reason to kill cougars. I'm not talking about the threats to people, animals, property. But he said, because the game fish is mandated to provide hunting opportunity for our constituents. And I said, so what it means is you are mandated to provide fun for your constituents and steal. Well, he said, he paused, a long pause. He said, yes, that's really it. And I've heard that phrase from numerous game and fish officials. We are mandated to provide hunting opportunity to kill animals for fun. That is pathetic. They don't eat them. They walk in their furs. They put them on the walls. They talk to their buddies how tough they are for killing something that would kill them if they didn't have a gun. One hunter, one bullet, gets the opportunity to steal all the millions of people out there. Opportunity to see a bear like Grizzly 399 or 610 or any bear. All bears are precious. All wolves are precious. All cougars are precious. One bullet, one jackass gets to kill a bear that millions and millions of people around the world have seen. And 399 will be on that list. She will go out of the park. Her first daughter was killed just outside the park by a deer hunter. He threatened him. He never even got up from the carcass and he shot it 5 times in the chest. Later he was fined $500. If that's the kind of respect we have for our wildlife, I'm very sad about that. And I hope you all think about the emotional capacity. They feel pain, they'll feel fun, they feel joy. Everything that, I suppose a lot of you have cats and dogs. Would you let somebody shoot or run over your dog with a snow machine 10 times until it's dead? Thank you.
Is that it? Okay. Well, I think it was a good meeting. It's good to see everybody. And we'll keep moving on. So, thanks a lot, everybody. We're done.